Hey truckers, today we're seeing part 9 of I Have a City in an Alternate World. Let's dive into the video. Ordinary weapons wouldn't have much effect on these undead. What Tangjin needed was a weapon of mass destruction, such as high-temperature pressure bombs, cloud explosion bombs, napalm bombs, and the like. However, there were many restrictions when these weapons were used. Although they were powerful, they did not seem to be suitable for the current situation in Holy Dragon City. Other than that, he could also pilot a helicopter and drop some packages from the sky, letting these corpse monsters have a taste of blooming everywhere. According to the altitude of the helicopter, coupled with Tangjin's mobile storage room, it seemed that the expected effect could be completely achieved. Moreover, compared to ordinary weapons, those restricted weapons were even more difficult to obtain. Therefore, Tangjin rejected the previous plan and chose to use a helicopter to drop them. The plan had been set, so let's begin. Through the all-purpose electronic kit, Tangjin could determine where he could find the things he needed. The power of black technology was once again demonstrated. That kind of top-secret information was completely defenseless in front of the all-purpose electronic kit. It was easily hacked and obtained, and then listed in front of Tangjin. Tangjin looked around for a while and chose a location. It was a military base in Kimchi country. It was in a completely closed state. The underground arsenal of the base had the things Tangjin needed. The car headed to the military base. After getting off the car from a distance, Tangjin turned on the quantum invisibility light screen and quietly entered the interior of the base. New N0VEL chapters are published on N0V/E/LB/IN/CO/M. A virtual topographic map marked Tangjin's destination. With this thing as a guide, Tangjin did not need to worry about getting lost in this huge base. Avoiding the soldiers on duty and military vehicles that passed by from time to time, Tangjin entered the basement of a building. After making 2 rounds, he came to a huge iron door. This was the destination of his trip. The metal door was locked with an electronic lock and was extremely secure. However, it was useless in front of Tangjin. The all-purpose electronic kit easily opened the door and Tangjin walked in. After looking around, Tangjin realized that he had made a big profit this time. This warehouse was filled with all kinds of weapons and equipment, including the high military explosives that Tangjin needed. The amount of weapons and equipment far exceeded his expectations. After Tangjin looked around, he began the work of transporting the goods. It had to be said that Tangjin was getting bolder and bolder. He had actually set his sights on the military base. However, in the face of an existence like Tangjin, who could not be treated with common sense, the military was probably helpless. After the moving work was over, Tangjin looked at the clean weapons warehouse and proudly snapped his fingers. He could totally imagine the wonderful expressions on the officers' faces when they found out that the arsenal had been stolen. Then, they would fly into a rage and dig 3 feet into the ground to find the mastermind. Let them be. The more they caused, the better. When there were more and more mysterious events in the original world, people would get used to it. Then, the theory of soul transmigration would not be so unacceptable. After leaving the underground weapons warehouse, Tangjin sneaked into the hangar and took away 2 assault helicopters and their weapons before leaving. A few hours later, some soldiers discovered that the plane had been stolen, and the entire base's alarm went off. Then, they found that the entire weapon warehouse had been moved away, without a single bullet left. The entire base was in a state of panic. All the forces that could be used were activated, trying to investigate the matter to the end. As the boss of the base, the American alliance in the original world immediately responded and mobilized elite troops to Kimchi country to take over the investigation. The entire original world became lively because of this matter. All forces were ready to make a move. The most active one was the force from the Ice Bear Alliance. The wind and rain in the original world seemed to have nothing to do with Tangjin. At this moment, he was standing in the square, studying how to control the iron bird in front of him. The assault helicopter was different from ordinary transportation. It was a powerful flying weapon that required professional training and rich piloting experience to fully pilot it. Tangjin didn't meet any of these conditions, but fortunately, he had the application store. There were applications that could solve the problem for him to download. All-Purpose Auxiliary Controller. With it, you can even pilot a spaceship. Download cost, 50,000 gold coins. This application could completely solve Tangjin's troubles, but the price of 50,000 gold coins was unacceptable to him. After searching for a while, he finally found an application that was suitable for him. Aircraft Pilot Assistant, Beginner. With its assistance, you can pilot any aircraft from the original world. Download cost, 5,000 gold coins. Tangjin gave a satisfied smile when he saw this. The price wasn't high, and it could solve the problem at hand. This would be it. After downloading and installing it, Tangjin jumped onto the armed helicopter and began to operate it according to the instructions. When Tangjin made a mistake, the application would automatically correct it to ensure that every action reached perfect standards. This plane was equipped with large-caliber artillery and many rockets. In the battlefield of the original world, it was definitely a super killer on the battlefield. However, if it was used to deal with the shocking number and powerful undead, it would not have much effect. Fortunately, Tangjin didn't plan to use this thing to deal with the corpse race. He only used it to block the flying vehicle. After modifying the ammunition and storing it in his storage space, Tangjin called Tai Sing and Qianlong over to let them experience the feeling of flying in the sky. The two of them came down from the city wall and looked at the military helicopter in the square with curiosity. When they heard Tangjin say that this thing could fly into the sky, the two people who were exclaiming about the sturdiness of the armed helicopter had suspicious expressions on their faces. They secretly thought, how can this metal lump fly? Since he had already mastered the method to pilot the armed helicopter, Tangjin directly pushed the two people into the helicopter. After giving them some instructions, he started the armed helicopter. The huge propeller started to turn, and the roar of the plane made Qianlong and the other man nervous. When the plane slowly took off from the ground, the two of them howled in excitement and looked down at the Holy Dragon Valley beneath their feet. The residents cheered in unison as they watched the city lord drive the Iron Bird higher and higher. While they were envious, they were also afraid that the city lord and the others would fall from the sky. Fortunately, such a situation did not happen. The city lord and the rest also flew higher and higher, further and further away. When they flew over the Holy Dragon City's walls, the soldiers who knew about the situation cheered again. Little Jimmy even kept shouting that he wanted to go up, but he was kicked a few times by the Bone Cat and the other soldiers. At the same time, he cursed, "Who is the city lord? No matter how high he flies, he's not afraid of falling to his death. Why the hell are you following him? Get lost!" After going out of the city wall, what came into view was a dense horde of zombie monsters. After seeing the military helicopter in the sky, they roared uneasily. Some of the zombie race even jumped up more than 20 meters high, trying to catch the helicopter. After flying to the center of the undead, Tangjin got Tai Seng and his partner to push down a few giant bags on the plane while constantly raising the plane up. Boom! Swish! A deafening explosion was heard. After the super cluster bomb modified by Tangjin exploded, a shockwave that was visible to the naked eye spread out. All the undead within the range of this shockwave turned into a pile of rotten meat. All the corpse clansmen were alarmed by the loud noise. They howled madly to vent the uneasiness in their hearts. A huge package with a parachute fell from the sky, heavily landing in the middle of a group of Sword Shield Ghost soldiers. Seeing the assault helicopter rapidly flying up, the Ghost soldiers roared in anger and slashed at the package. However, these Saber Shield Ghost soldiers only managed to slash a few times before they were engulfed by a searing wave of air. Even the countless Saber Shield Ghost soldiers around them were blasted into nothingness. After seeing the power of the cluster bombs, the three of them were amazed, especially from the perspective of the sky. The visual impact was even stronger. Seeing countless undead being blown into the sky by the shockwave, the three of them were boiling with blood. Seeing that the effect of the attack was very good, Tangjin became spirited and threw the cluster bombs on the plane one after another. The impact of the falling large package that weighed hundreds of kilograms could easily smash the undead into meat patties. Although there were many of the corpse race, the power of the explosion was too terrifying. It was not inferior to the power of the self-destruction bomb. These corpse race members were simply unable to resist and could only escape in all directions. There were more and more giant pits on the ground, and the remains of the monsters covered the gravel plain. After Tangjin threw all the cluster bombs, there was no longer a zombie monster in front of Holy Dragon City. Now that the undead army had retreated, it was time to harvest the spoils of war. Tai Sing took out his walkie-talkie and informed the soldiers on the city wall to come down and clean up the battlefield. Tangjin, on the other hand, piloted the assault helicopter and circled 2 more rounds before landing it on the gravel plain. The three of them jumped off the plane and started to collect the brains of the high-level undead. Tangjin stepped on the gravel that had yet to dissipate from the smoke. He put away the brain of a corpse centurion and was about to collect another monster's brain when he heard a sound similar to the sound of horse hooves coming from the distance. Tangjin looked in the direction of the voice, only to see nearly 100 people riding war horses as they galloped in his direction. After this group of people entered the area filled with the corpses of the undead race, they immediately jumped down from their horses and began to collect the brain beads in a swaggering manner. They did not put Tangjin in their eyes at all. Tangjin was initially startled. He smiled and shook his head before slowly walking over. "Buddy, after you guys collect the brain beads, put them all here." Tangjin pointed at the ground under his feet and spoke to those people. His face carried a very serious expression. Through the clothes of these people, Tangjin recognized that they were the notorious insect thieves who were currently taking advantage of him. After hearing Tangjin's words, these insect bandits feigned a blank look at each other. Then, they began to laugh wildly without any restraint. After laughing for a long time, one of the insect bandits pointed at Tangjin and scolded, "Is there something wrong with your brain? Could it be that these corpse monsters belong to your family, so you won't let us collect their brains?" Tangjin replied with an "Oh." After which, he feigned a blank expression and asked, "But I killed them. Shouldn't they belong to me?" The insect thieves laughed wildly again, and the eyes that looked at Tangjin became contemptuous. "F***ck your mother, who do you think you are? And you killed them all? How did you kill them? Are you farting? What's the point of talking to him, just cut him down with a knife." The insect thieves spoke one after another. They did not place Tangjin in their eyes at all. They even discussed how to torture and kill him for fun in front of him. When the bug thieves heard the loud noise in the distance, they rushed over on their horses to take a look. In the end, they did not see the scene of Tangjin blowing up the monsters. Instead, they saw the corpses of the corpse monsters on the ground, and there were even some high-level monsters among them. The bug thieves were not interested in what caused the death of these corpse monsters, they were only interested in the brains. As long as one wasn't a fool, they would know that this meant a huge fortune. The insect bandits, who had always made a living by killing and robbing, would naturally not let go of this opportunity to make a fortune. As for this overconfident and crazy brat in front of him, he would just kill him directly. He dared to show off in front of the insect bandits who kill people like flies, shamelessly saying that he killed all these monsters, and not allowing them to collect their brains. Wasn't he tired of living? Tang Jin, who had retracted his aura, looked like an ordinary person. It was inevitable that the insect thieves would misunderstand. Furthermore, this group of people acted arrogantly. Previously, they even dared to intercept and kill the cultivator battle team from Black Rock City. It was believed that they did not place Tang Jin, the city lord of Holy Dragon City, in their eyes. When he saw a few insect bandits walking over with sneers and unsheathing the battle swords at their waists while staring at him with killing intent, Tang Jin shook his head and muttered to himself, "Actually, not all human beings should be saved. For example, you scumbags should be exterminated." As soon as he finished speaking, Tang Jin flicked his wrist and a machine gun appeared in his hand. Da-da 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 da-da. The scorching hot bullets whistled out. Before the 10 or so insect bandits in front of Tang Jin could even recover from their shock, they were already torn into two by the bullets. They fell to the ground and howled in pain. The strange insects on the faces of the insect bandits gave them a strong life force, but it made them suffer even more in this situation. All of the insect bandits were stunned. They looked at the dozen or so of their comrades who had died and cursed as they pounced forward. Some of them waved their swords while others raised their arms. Through the strange parasites on their arms, they shot poisonous stingers at Tang Jin one after another. Tang Jin dodged the attacks of the bug bandits while retaliating. As time passed, more and more bug bandits fell. Qianlong and Tai Sing had also rushed over. The two of them had automatic rifles on them and were currently dodging the poisonous stingers of the bug bandits while attacking them from different directions. As more and more bug bandits fell, the leader of the bug bandits saw that the situation was bad and immediately led the rest of the bug bandits onto their warhorses and began to escape into the depths of the wilderness. "This bunch of damned insect thieves, they actually set their sights on us, they really don't know what's good for them." Qianlong spat out a mouthful of saliva before opening fire on the head of an insectoid who was trying to launch a sneak attack. He then turned to Tang Jin and said, "These insect thieves are the most shameless. They can do anything. Since we've made enemies today, we'll be harassed by them in the future. It's impossible to guard against them." Tai Sing also had a look of agreement on his face, and the disgust on his face was the same as Qianlong's. Read lat.stchpters on n/v/l/b.i.cm. No wanderer would have a good impression of the black sheep of the human race, the insect thieves. It would not be an exaggeration to say that everyone wanted to kill them. Tang Jin coldly looked at the bug thieves that were running further and further away. He turned his head and asked, "Since the insect thieves are so despicable, does no one want to destroy them? It's not that I don't want to exterminate them, but that these guys are very secretive, and no one knows where their nest is." Everyone, including Black Rock City, had tried to hunt down the bug bandits. In the end, not only did they not find their nest, but they also caused quite a number of casualties. Therefore, no one paid attention to these bug bandits after that, which made them more and more arrogant. Qianlong's face was filled with regret as he spoke. From his expression, it seemed like he hated the insect thieves to the core. Tang Jin didn't know what kind of grudge Qianlong had with the insect bandits. However, these fellows had come to take advantage of him and had such a bad reputation. If Tang Jin didn't deal with them, it wouldn't be in line with his character. Moreover, he had been a bandit for many years. These insect bandits must have accumulated a lot of wealth. How could Tang Jin miss such an opportunity to make a fortune? "You two get on the plane first. We'll go back to the city to get some things, and then we'll go to the wilderness to meet those bastards." Tang Jin's speed was extremely fast. Since he did not wish to let these insect thieves off, he naturally would not waste any time. Once these fellows disappeared from the map, it would be unknown when he would be able to catch their traces again. After replenishing their supplies, the assault helicopter whizzed out and flew straight into the depths of the wilderness. At this time, the bug thieves had already run out of the map's display range. Fortunately, the plane's speed was fast enough. It didn't take long for the bug thieves to appear on the map again. However, Tang Jin discovered that the place where these guys were moving forward was actually a huge lake. Tang Jin stared unblinkingly at these insect thieves as he piloted the plane. He wanted to see what they were doing by the lake. Could it be that their nest was in the lake? This was a good location that no one could guess, but how were they going to enter and live underwater? After observing for a while, Tang Jin noticed that the bug thieves had all jumped off their warhorses. Then, they took out two semicircular objects from their pockets. One of them was placed on the warhorse's mouth, while the other was placed on their own mouth. Tang Jin zoomed in on the map. Only then did he discover that those semicircular things were actually disgusting bugs with countless tentacles. Then, the insect thieves led their warhorses and walked into the lake from a shore full of gravel. They quickly disappeared without a trace, leaving only faint ripples on the water surface. So that's how it is. No wonder we couldn't find it. Also, that semicircle insect that covers its mouth should have the ability to provide oxygen underwater. After figuring out these things, Tang Jin had an idea of what to do. After talking to Qianlong and the other man, he returned to the Holy Dragon City. The nest of the insect thieves was located under the lake, and they didn't know the exact situation. Therefore, Tang Jin planned to go alone and find out what was going on. It wasn't suitable for Qianlong and the other two to follow. After returning to the Holy Dragon City, Tang Jin parked the plane on the city wall and decided to head to the bug thieves' lair. Inadvertently, he saw the Holy Dragon City's soldiers struggling to go up and down the city walls. Tang Jin thought for a moment and resisted the thought of opening the city gates on the city walls. It was better to wait until the threat of the undead race and Houndhead men was completely resolved before he considered whether to open the city gates or not. Explore Ta Ti stories at no/l/bin.cm. After arriving at the place where they had fought with the insect bandits, Tang Jin greeted the Holy Dragon City's soldiers and bent over to search one of the insect bandits' bodies. He quickly found the semicircular insect that was placed in a bottle filled with water. It was still struggling non-stop in his hand. In addition, Tang Jin also studied the bugs that could be parasitic on the arm and the face-hugging bug, the symbol of the bug thieves. It was a pity that these two types of bugs were already dead. It seemed that they were something that depended on the user's life. When Tang Jin was studying the insect, Tai Seng and the others were worried about a large pile of warhorses. This was a good thing, and even money might not be able to buy it. However, the city walls of the Holy Dragon City were too high, and it would take a lot of effort to get it into the valley. A group of men were discussing how to get the warhorses in. After Tang Jin heard this, he pointed at the helicopter on the city wall and said, "You don't have to worry. With that thing, I can even get an elephant in." Tai Seng and the others were overjoyed when they heard this, and they requested Tang Jin to quickly bring the warhorses into the sacred Dragon Valley. If they were to escape, they would suffer a great loss. Tang Jin had originally planned to head to the insect thieves' lair after this, but after hearing Tai Seng's request, he felt that he was a little too impatient. Thus, he nodded and said that he would take care of it. However, he had to make some preparations before that. If they wanted to use the military helicopters to transport these warhorses, they would need a suitable cage. The Holy Dragon City currently did not have one, so they had to go to the original world to find one. Tang Jin chose the container at the dock as his target. This was because the size of the container was just right. It also saved him the trouble of looking for it everywhere. After being teleported back to his original world, Tang Jin directly took a car to the dock. At a hidden location near the dock, he activated the quantum stealth light curtain and went straight to the container storage position at the dock. This time, his target was a container. Therefore, there was no need for him to open it and inspect the goods. After he found a hidden location, Tang Jin kept a container of a suitable size. The entire process was extremely easy. When Tang Jin saw that he had finished his business, he teleported back to the tower world. However, Tang Jin did not know that at the instant he collected the container, a series of urgent alarm sounds immediately sounded from a hidden room at the dock. 4 or 5 American agents who were chatting suddenly jumped in front of a large row of computer screens. Their fingers moved quickly, and a concise report sounded from time to time. Abnormality found in area number 1. Comparison complete. A container is missing. Unknown energy signature detected in area number 1. Duration, 0.1 seconds. Area number 1 has been locked. No unusual people have been found. Scan of area number 1 complete. Abnormality detected, but cannot be accurately determined. An unknown energy has appeared in area number 1 for 0.1 seconds. The energy has disappeared. At the same time, a group of fully armed American soldiers appeared like ghosts and quickly surrounded Tang Jin's previous position. However, Tang Jin had already teleported away, so they naturally missed. However, the area was strictly sealed off. In less than 5 minutes, several cars arrived and a dozen American experts entered the scene with all kinds of equipment. When they arrived, a huge canopy was set up, completely blocking the peeping from the sky. They set up all kinds of equipment and searched the area for half a day. In the end, they carefully picked up a few pieces of sand and a strand of hair from the ground and put them into a sealed box. Then, they removed the equipment and ran away like the wind. Perhaps, Tang Jin himself had never imagined that the debris that had fallen from his shoes would reveal so much information. However, even if he knew, he would not place it in his heart. This was because from the beginning to the end, he had been using some not-so-obvious methods to declare his existence to the masters of this world. The day they knew about him would be the day Tang Jin laid his cards on the table. As for whether he would fall into danger or be controlled, Tang Jin was not too worried. Compared to the mysterious and strange world of buildings, the power of the original world was still too simple and shallow. In the face of the application of black technology, it was almost defenseless. Tang Jin believed that he would definitely be the final victor. Moreover, from the very beginning, he had the intention of bringing benefits to his original world. He was walking on the righteous path, so what was there to fear? After returning to the Holy Dragon City, Tang Jin and the others tied the steel wire rope to the container and secured it with a U-shaped bolt. Tai Seng and the warriors rushed the warhorses into the container and closed the door firmly. Then, Tang Jin started the helicopter and hoisted the warhorses to the sacred Dragon Valley. After the warhorses were finished, Tang Jin also hoisted a batch of high-level zombie corpses to increase the nutrition of the mother tree that had just advanced to level 2. They busied themselves until the evening before everyone returned to the Holy Dragon City. Tang Jin threw the plane onto the city wall and immediately ran out to check on today's harvest. In the resting room on the city wall, Qianlong and Tai Seng stared at the pile of leather bags on the ground with wide eyes. Opening the leather bag and grabbing a handful of sparkling brains, Tai Seng and Qianlong looked at each other and burst into laughter. With these gains, the city lord finally doesn't have to worry about his brain anymore, hee hee. That's right, we don't have to look at his ugly face all day long, it's all because of this damn brain bead. Tang Jin, who had just entered the door, Ying Luo. After the three of them finished counting the brain beads, Tang Jin's face was filled with unconcealable joy. He kept the brain beads into his storage space and said to Thousand Dragon Tyson, whose hands were about to cramp, "I'm so happy today, let's go drink." The two of them were overjoyed and immediately ordered the soldiers to drive to the warehouse to get the wine. At the same time, they also brought a cartload of meat, intestines, and other things that they had gotten from the container last time. Since they were going to drink wine, they must drink to their heart's content. The originally exhausted soldiers immediately jubilantly drove the 2 pickup trucks that Tangjin had brought over and ran straight to the Holy Dragon City's warehouse. They moved 2 carts of food and wine from the warehouse that Murong Ziyan was in charge of and ran back in a flash. Someone had already cleared out the area, and a large row of tables made from ammunition boxes was arranged. When the pickup truck arrived, the soldiers immediately moved the beer, white wine, and red wine onto the truck. Then, there were all kinds of food, most of which were canned food and military food. Next, everyone gathered around the table, filling it up. Under their feet was the huge city wall, and above their heads was the bright moon in the sky. The oil barrels around them were burning fiercely, and the monsters were howling for food below the city wall. In this atmosphere, everyone raised their glasses and drank to their heart's content, and the laughter were endless. Some of the soldiers who could not drink took a pile of food and drinks and ate while observing the situation below the city. Their vigilance did not drop at all. The meal lasted until midnight. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, those who were supposed to sleep went to sleep, and those who were supposed to stand guard went to sleep. The crowd dispersed in a hubbub. Tangjin ran to the mother tree's treehouse and slept for the night. It wasn't until the next morning when the sun shone in through the cracks of the treehouse that Tangjin stretched his body and walked out. After taking in a breath of fresh air, Tangjin stood on the mother tree's 2-meter-thick branch and sized up the mother tree that had advanced to rank 2. The mother tree's trunk had expanded to an extremely exaggerated extent. Tangjin estimated that it had a diameter of at least 20 meters, which was extremely spectacular. Sitting under the mother tree, one could see bits of light falling from the branches and leaves from time to time, which was an extraordinary beauty. The remains of the high-level zombie monsters that Tangjin had brought over yesterday were now swept into the ground by the roots of the mother tree. It was not visible from the outside at all, but this was good. After all, those hideous zombie monsters' remains looked too disgusting. Perhaps, it was the nature of the mother tree to worship nature. Even if it was fed with flesh and blood by Tangjin, it still could not change the proud nature in its bones. Currently, within the 1-mile radius of the mother tree, the ground was covered with inch-long light green grass, like a flat green carpet, soft and comfortable. Every now and then, there would be piles of bright flowers blooming, and a faint fragrance would drift in the air. After not seeing them for a day, a group of colorful birds with long tail feathers flew over from God knows where. They occupied a corner of the mother tree without the permission of the city lord, Tangjin. At this time, they were chirping happily among the branches and leaves. The war horses that had been brought into the Holy Dragon Valley yesterday were now having fun on the lawn under the mother tree. There was also a pair of shameless guys doing it in broad daylight. The stallion's long face had a triumphant expression. After Tangjin took a glance, a flash of inspiration suddenly appeared in his mind. He felt that he should take out the Dog-Headed People's Building Foundation and use it as a livestock pen after the building was built. He believed that the livestock's fertility rate would definitely increase greatly. The more Tangjin thought about it, the more he felt that this method was feasible. He secretly thought that after the Holy Dragon City's scale increased and expanded, he would definitely use the Dog-Headed People's Building Foundation to build a livestock pen. If the Kobold royal family knew of Tangjin's plan, they would definitely send their troops to attack again. They would use the building foundation that had been separated from the Kobold royal city's foundation to build a pigsty. Only Tangjin could think of such a despicable move. This was simply a huge insult to the kobolds. After sweeping a glance at the increasing number of beautiful treehouses, Tangjin greeted Li Sha, who was living in another treehouse, and descended to the ground along the tree vines. He went to the lakeside to wash up and then went to the cafeteria for breakfast. Only then did Tangjin carry his bag, which contained the insect thieves' strange insects that could breathe underwater. He drove a pickup truck and went straight to the insect thieves' nest. In the boundless wilderness, Tangjin drove the pickup truck all the way. From time to time, there would be wandering monsters blocking the road. In the end, all of them were shot in the head by Tangjin without exception. The car did not stop at all along the way. After running for a while, Tangjin finally arrived at the edge of the desolate lake. He put the pickup truck into the origin space and placed the insect that could breathe underwater into his mouth. After sensing the breath coming out of Tangjin's mouth, the strange insect immediately sealed Tangjin's mouth completely and inserted 2 wriggling tentacles into his nasal cavity. At the same time, on the back of the strange insect, countless leaf-like organs stretched out and began to shake. Tangjin sensed for a moment and discovered that his breathing wasn't greatly affected. He only felt a little suffocated. Doubt immediately rose in his heart. Could it be that this strange insect had other effects other than breathing underwater? He turned on the quantum stealth light curtain and slowly walked into the water. In the blink of an eye, he entered the depths of the lake. After entering the water, the strange insect started to absorb oxygen from the water to provide Tangjin with breathing. Although it was not as comfortable as outside, it was enough to support normal breathing. After confirming that there was no problem with his breathing, Tangjin began to size up the environment at the bottom of the lake. As the lake was not polluted, the lake water was extremely clear. One could easily see the scenery at the bottom of the lake in the distance. However, Tangjin did not see any aquatic creatures after looking around. He did not know why. He switched to the map view and the entire scenery at the bottom of the lake was immediately reflected in his eyes. It was also at this moment that Tangjin discovered a huge monster swimming not far away. Its appearance resembled a deformed Wyrm. This was a level 4 monster and Tangjin could easily kill it. As he was afraid of alerting the enemy, Tangjin did not kill it. As the quantum invisibility light curtain was activated, the monster did not discover Tangjin. It continued to wander aimlessly and soon swam to an extremely far place. After Tangjin looked at the terrain at the bottom of the lake, he did not discover any traces of the insect thieves. However, he had personally seen the insect thieves enter the lake, so he firmly believed that the nest of the insect thieves was at the bottom of the lake. Find updates on n/v/elben.co/m. Tangjin once again checked every corner of the bottom of the lake. He finally found a dark cave entrance on a cliff at the bottom of the lake. Tangjin's spirit was shaken. He immediately walked toward the cave. After he arrived in front of the cave and carefully observed it for a while, Tangjin carefully stepped inside. The inside of the cave was very spacious, and the stone walls were covered with fluorescent aquatic grass. The entire cave was shrouded in a layer of misty light, which did not affect the normal vision at all. After walking for a distance, Tangjin discovered that the cave had begun to gradually extend upwards. Some places on the top of the cave had already left the water surface. After walking for a distance, the lake water in the cave had completely disappeared. At this moment, Tangjin was located in an underground karst cave. The space was very spacious and there were clusters of fluorescent plants here and there. They were growing very luxuriantly. After searching and probing once more, Tangjin chose a passage and quietly walked over. After walking for a short distance, Tangjin heard a series of intermittent conversations. Immediately after, he saw 2 insect thieves walking over from the opposite side of the passage. Licking his old face for a subscription. The number of subscriptions was too terrible, and it was annoying to look at. He could only thicken his face and ask for subscriptions. He hoped that friends who followed the book could come to Cheetian to subscribe and support him. Thank you again. The foreign girl I got a few days ago is really not bad. Her figure and skin are really good, and her little face is really mesmerizing. It's a pity that we can't play with this kind of thing and can only be enjoyed by the big boss. What a pity, Ying Luo. Kid, if you don't want to die, don't say such things in the future. If someone tells on you, be careful not to catch you and feed you to the insects. The big boss can't hear me. He hasn't left the house for a long time. I'm just talking to you, brother. He. The two insect thieves were wearing strange insect armor, and they were talking with lecherous smiles on their faces as they walked. They didn't seem to notice that an enemy who had just sneaked in was standing beside them. Tang Jin hid in a corner and waited for the two insect bandits to come over. He then directly broke the neck of one of the insect bandits and gently put his corpse down. The other insect bandit had just realized that something was wrong when Tang Jin's purple lightning short sword was pressed against the neck of the insect bandit. At the same time, he said in a low voice, "Don't speak, or I'll kill you." The insect thief panicked as it felt the chill of the sharp blade. It threatened the invisible enemy in front of it. "Who are you? How dare you be so presumptuous here? Do you believe I'll run away?" Before he could finish his sentence, Tang Jin's purple lightning short sword had already cut off one of the bug thief's ears. The bug thief was about to scream in pain, but Tang Jin had firmly locked his throat. At the same time, Tang Jin turned off the quantum stealth light screen and waved his middle finger in front of the bug thief. "If you don't behave, I'll cut your throat open." The bug thief looked at the enemy that suddenly appeared in front of him and nodded slightly. After saying this, Tang Jin slowly released his hand. The insect thief coughed and took a deep breath. He looked at Tang Jin and said, "What do you want to know?" You updates tnvel/buy.com. How many people are here? Who has the highest cultivation? There are more than 500 people in total. The one with the highest cultivation is the big boss, a level 5 cultivator. Where's the big boss and the others? The big boss hasn't appeared for a long time. The others are in the other caves. Tang Jin nodded before asking, "Where's your treasure room? And where are those strange insects?" "I don't know the location of the treasure room, but the bugs are all in the glowing iron room." "What glowing metal house?" Tang Jin was startled when he heard this and asked. The bug bandit raised his chin and turned his eyes to the other end of the passage. "It's right there. You'll know if you go and see for yourself." After saying this, the insect thief looked at Tang Jin and sneered, "I've said what I need to say. Be quick when you attack." Tang Jin stared at the insect thief for a long time before he nodded his head and stabbed his sword into the insect thief's heart. The insect thief's body stiffened and struggled a few times before it stopped moving. After putting away the two bug bandits' corpses, Tang Jin activated the quantum stealth light screen and continued to explore. After turning the corner from the passage, a huge underground space appeared in front of Tang Jin. The scenery here was even more beautiful. The strange plants that emitted 5-colored fluorescent lights illuminated the place, making it beautiful. It was just that the piles of human bones everywhere destroyed this beautiful scenery. A metal building that was like a crystal palace was reflected in Tang Jin's eyes. Its shape was strange and it had a very high-tech feeling. Its entire body emitted a faint purple light, just like a peerless treasure. Tang Jin was dumbstruck. He only recovered after watching for a long time. He inhaled a deep breath of air and began to slowly approach the metal building at the center of the space. A few bug thieves were chatting outside and did not realize that an enemy had sneaked in. Tang Jin carefully avoided these people and brought them to the front of the metal building. After sizing it up, Tang Jin discovered that the main door of the building had already been locked. The surface of the building was as smooth as a mirror. He had no idea how to enter. The appearance of a building with a technological aura appeared in his mind. Tang Jin activated the all-purpose electronic kit and let it try to scan it. It might be useful. The application was activated. Tang Jin looked at the data in front of him and refused to miss a single thing. The words that Tang Jin could understand suddenly changed. At the same time, a strange word began to roll crazily. After a full minute, the word suddenly stopped rolling and a series of prompts appeared in front of him. The core secret of the laboratory has been cracked. Highest control has been obtained. The words disappeared and the smooth metal door quietly opened. Tang Jin did not hesitate when he saw this. He immediately stepped in and the metal door quickly closed. This was a room that was filled with a sci-fi atmosphere. The different architectural style gave one a refreshing feeling. After Tang Jin looked around for a moment, he slowly walked along the dreamlike building's passageway. Not long after, he entered a room that was similar to a laboratory. However, after seeing the scene in the laboratory, Tang Jin suddenly had an impulse to kill. There were more than 30 corpses in the room. They were all broken and there were traces of parasites gnawing on them. Judging from their painful expressions, they must have been cruelly abused before they died. In the transparent container at the side, there were many strange-shaped insects and insect eggs of various colors, which looked terrifying and ferocious. Tang Jin saw the underwater breathing insect, the face-hugging insect, and the scorpion-like insect that was parasitic on his arm. As for the other insects, Tang Jin didn't know what they were used for. There were too many insects, and Tang Jin was dazzled by them. A wave of faint moans was faintly transmitted into Tang Jin's ears, causing his nerves to immediately tense up. Following the direction of the sound, Tang Jin carefully moved closer. It was another spacious room. Through a transparent wall, a strange insect close to 3 meters in size entered Tang Jin's sight. It had a dark and solid outer shell and looked very ferocious. However, it seemed to have been dissected as its abdomen had been completely hollowed out. On top of the strange insect's head, there was a heart-shaped mass of meat. It was covered with red blood vessels, and countless red tubular fibers hung down from it, connecting to the strange insect's body. Upon closer inspection of the strange insect's limbs, one could see that it was twitching slightly, which proved that it was still alive. What surprised Tang Jin was that there was currently a naked brawny man standing inside the strange insect's body. He seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep. The brawny man's body was covered in muscles, but now his body had actually grown together with the insect's body. It seemed that it would not take long for him and the insect to become one. Tang Jin felt uncomfortable all over his body when he thought of a human being merging with the strange insect's body. However, if the appearance was a little more beautiful and he did not need to merge with the insect for his entire life, Tang Jin would be able to accept it. No matter what was said, this fellow who tried to merge with the insect was someone Tang Jin had to kill. Tang Jin walked into the room and came in front of the man. He pulled out a pistol from the quick-draw holster on his waist and aimed it at the man's eyebrows. As if he sensed the danger of death, that man actually opened his eyes. After seeing Tang Jin standing in front of him, he revealed an incomparably shocked expression and asked with a hoarse voice, "Who are you? How did you get in?" Bang! A gunshot rang out, and the man was shot in the middle of his eyebrows. He hung his head down unwillingly. "The person who killed you walked in on his own." Tang Jin pulled the trigger and fired a few more shots at the man's head. Only after his head was smashed did he reply with a relaxed expression. If Tang Jin's guess was correct, the fellow that he had killed with a single shot should be the big boss of the insect bandits. From Tang Jin's point of view, this fellow was a complete lunatic. He had cultivated those strange insects and even used humans for his experiments. The mountain of white bones outside and the wreckage in the laboratory could prove this point. Perhaps he wanted to pursue greater power, or perhaps it was just a crazy idea, but now he actually thought of fusing himself with the insects. If the experiment was successful, perhaps he would have a strong combat power. It was just that kind of neither human nor ghost appearance, just thinking about it made people feel disgusted. The leader of the insect bandits, who had yet to complete his experiment, was like a helpless lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Despite having a level 5 cultivation, his life was easily ended by Tang Jin. This metal building was made of special materials, so it was almost impossible to open it by force. Therefore, the boss of the bug bandits thought that it was extremely safe here, and no one could enter except himself. It was a pity that the boss of the bug bandits never dreamed that someone would be able to crack the password of this building and even obtain the highest control of this place. This big boss of the insect bandits had done many unjust things, so he deserved to die. No longer paying attention to that fellow, Tang Jin began to look around the building. It didn't take long for him to find a computer-like device in one of the rooms. Tang Jin fiddled with it for a while, and through the wireless connection of the all-purpose electronic kit, he learned all the information about the building. Tang Jin looked at the information that was rolling before his eyes. He combined the information that he already knew and made the following judgment. This building also came from another plane. Before it was destroyed, this building was a scientific research laboratory in that plane, mainly used to study those strange insects. The laboratory appeared in the world of Luqing after the main plane was destroyed, becoming part of the wild building. And the place where this building appeared was at the edge of the lake. At that time, a group of ordinary wanderers had discovered this wild building. They immediately explored it, and in the process, they found this strange building that was incompatible with the wild building. After cleaning up the building, the insect thieves did their best to move the metal building underground. This underground space was once the secret base of the insect thieves. It was the best place to hide the laboratory. The head of the insect thieves was lucky enough to obtain the authority to enter this room. Relying on the strange insects in the building, the insect thieves rose rapidly, becoming stronger and more arrogant. Ever since the big boss of the insect thieves had obtained the strange insects in this building, he had relied on speculation, analysis, and continuous experiments to grasp the characteristics and breeding methods of 7 to 8 strange insects. However, behind these achievements, countless wanderers had died an unnatural death. Now that Tang Jin had obtained the highest authority in this laboratory, he naturally had all the information about these strange insects. After a simple glance at the introduction of these strange insects, Tang Jin realized that these insects were indeed mysterious. The research results of the insect thieves' leader had only scratched the surface at best. For example, the parasites that were like scorpions were harmless. Even if they were to parasitize a human body, they would not cause any harm to the human body. Through the information, Tang Jin discovered that its ability was not as simple as shooting poisonous stingers. Through a special energy input method, the Zerg could not only shoot out poisonous stingers that were as powerful as bullets, but it could also shoot out compressed energy bullets with astonishing power. As long as they were ordinary human cultivators, they could send the extra energy into the parasite and shoot it out at a critical moment. This kind of energy could be compressed and accumulated, and its power was extremely shocking. Its lethality was not inferior to that of a 100mm grenade. Tang Jin's heart immediately became greatly interested after reading the insect's data. He slowly walked to the transparent containers used to cultivate the insects and picked out a scorpion that had a purple-black appearance. According to the introduction of the laboratory's information, this kind of dark-colored scorpion was the strongest and healthiest super insect with the most potential for development. Unfortunately, the boss of the insect thieves didn't know what was good, and Tang Jin got it for nothing. Tang Jin placed the scorpion in front of his eyes. He carefully sized up this fellow that was continuously struggling. After which, he slowly placed it on his left arm. As soon as the scorpion touched Tangjin's arm, its waving claws and tail immediately pierced into his skin and flesh. Its transparent legs began to suck blood. As Tangjin's blood entered the scorpion's body, the originally purplish-black limbs immediately turned blood red. A minute later, the color of the scorpion's outer shell began to gradually become lighter. In the end, it was actually the same color as Tangjin's skin. Half of its body had also sunk into Tangjin's arm. At a glance, one would only mistake it as a scorpion-shaped huge scar. Tangjin moved his arm and felt that his body was not affected. He then raised his left arm and aimed it at the corpse of the big boss of the insect bandits. Whoosh! The scorpion's venomous sting hit its target, creating a hole in the corpse of the boss. It was no less powerful than a bullet. After seeing the power of these scorpions and strange insects, Tangjin nodded his head in satisfaction. He decided to cultivate more strange insects in the future. It would be best to give one to every Holy Dragon City soldier. Who would complain about having too many good things? Suppressing his curiosity to test out other bugs, Tangjin began to search for the treasure room of the boss of the bug thieves. Since this laboratory was regarded as the safest place by the great leader of the insect bandits, he would definitely hide his treasures here. As long as Tangjin searched carefully, he would definitely find something. After carefully searching for half a day, Tangjin finally found the treasure room of the big boss of the bug bandits. It was a small room filled with a mess of things. There were ores, medicinal herbs, and materials from monsters. The sparkling and resplendent brain beads were mixed among these treasures, and it was impossible to tell the number. At first glance, it looked like a huge garbage dump. Tangjin did not have the time to sort it out. He simply put it all into his storage space and prepared to slowly count it when he returned to Holy Dragon City. After understanding all the functions of this laboratory, Tangjin wanted to take it back to Holy Dragon City and make it his own. However, before that, Tangjin had to get rid of all the insect bandits here. After eliminating evil, there was no longer a need for these insect thieves to live. Silently walking out of the laboratory, Tangjin carried a military rifle equipped with a silencer and pulled the trigger at the defenseless bug thieves. All west ch.rs on n.o/vli/n/.cm. Even with a silencer, the automatic rifle's sound was still very loud. However, before the insectoid could react, the cold bullets had already shattered their skulls. After easily dealing with the few insect thieves, Tangjin chose a passage and walked in with his gun. Tangjin had just entered the tunnel when he saw a group of insect thieves aggressively charging out. Clearly, the gunshots and the miserable cries of a few insect thieves before they died had alarmed them. After the two sides met, without any unnecessary movements, Tangjin's rifle opened fire once again. The bullets seemed to have eyes as each bullet landed on the head and neck of the bug thief, each shot fatal. Tangjin's current reaction speed was extremely abnormal. Coupled with the support from his application, those insect bandits did not have the strength to fight back at all. Even when some of the insect bandits used the scorpions to spit out poisonous stingers in an attempt to kill Tangjin, he was able to easily dodge them. After annihilating this group of insect thieves, Tangjin continued to move forward. Seeing another group of insect thieves pouncing over, he casually threw out 2 grenades. The smoke and dust from the explosion had yet to dissipate when Tangjin took out his machine gun and fired continuously at the group of dizzy bug thieves. Tangjin did not have any extra thoughts in his mind. All he wanted to do was to kill. The gunshots stopped and all the bug bandits fell to the ground. Tangjin crossed the pool of blood and looked at a bug bandit who had not died and was staring at him angrily. "Who are you? Why are you in a rush?" Bang! Tangjin was simply too lazy to care about this kind of scum and directly ended it with a shot. The intense sound of gunfire alarmed all of the bug bandits. They swarmed over and let out strange howls while shooting poisonous stingers at Tangjin, throwing javelins and bows. A few poisonous stingers were unable to pose a threat to Tangjin. However, once the number exceeded 100, it could not be easily ignored. Tangjin did not dare to be careless when he saw the dense poisonous stingers peeling off the rocks that he used as cover. After throwing out a few hand grenades, he swiftly dodged to another position. Ka-ba! The chain of bullets for the machine gun was used up. Tangjin quickly took out the machine gun grenade and bombarded the bug bandits. His inventory was filled with ammunition, enough to support the consumption of this battle. When the grenade launcher was empty, Tangjin took out a sniper rifle and directly used it as a semi-automatic rifle. The insect bandits were turned over and their bodies filled every corner of the underground space. The insect thieves were frightened. They looked at Tangjin, who was like a god of death, and secretly cried out bitterly. They were completely unaware of when they had offended such a ruthless person. Looking at his posture, it seemed like he wanted to exterminate the entire family. The sound of gunfire and explosions rang out, and the screams of the insectoid thieves rang out. Faced with Tangjin, an abnormal existence with a high cultivation level, sufficient weapons and strange abilities, the insect bandits did not have any advantage from the start. The longer the battle dragged on, the fewer the number of insect bandits that could continue fighting. After fighting for half an hour, the insect bandits discovered that there were only a few of their companions left. Realizing this, the bug bandits were scared out of their wits and immediately gave up on the battle. The remaining dozens of bug bandits fled along the tunnel. Tangjin coldly snorted. He touched his face that was covered in dust, picked up the grape shotgun that he had just changed, and chased after them. In less than a minute, a continuous muffled sound rang out in the passage, mixed with the screams of the insect thieves, which did not subside for a long time. After the gunshots finally stopped, Tangjin walked out with the smell of gunpowder. His entire body was covered in fine bits of meat and blood, making him look abnormally ferocious. Letting out a long breath, Tangjin took out a paper towel and wiped the dirt off his hands and face. Then, he got up and went to another passage. After walking for a short distance, Tangjin smelled a pungent smell. At the same time, a large row of firm cages appeared in front of Tangjin. Tangjin's eyes flashed across these cages. He no longer regretted killing the insect bandits. If he was given a chance to choose again, his methods would likely be even more brutal. It was unknown how many people were imprisoned in the long cage. Each and every one of them was dressed in tattered clothes. Their faces were yellow and their bodies were emaciated. Their bodies emitted a foul smell as they looked at Tangjin with dull eyes. In some cages, some wanderers were already dead, but their bodies were left there. No one cared about them, and they were left to rot and stink. When Tangjin passed by a cage, he found that it was full of women. It was just that their private parts were not covered at all. Their bodies were covered with dirty filth. After seeing Tangjin, they did not have any reaction. It was as if their souls had dissipated, leaving only a weak body. A bug thief poked his head out from a corner and tried to use a poisonous stinger to sneak attack him, but he was discovered by Tangjin through the map view. He pulled him out and cut off his head without saying a word. "I've killed all the insect bandits. You're free." When they saw the headless corpses spurting blood, the wanderers with numb faces finally realized something. Their intermittent voices rang out like a bee's buzz. All of them begged Tangjin to save them. Tangjin did not say any nonsense. He released over a dozen men from a cage and ordered them to release everyone. For a moment, the cave was filled with the sound of locks being unlocked and tears of joy. Even though the detained wanderers were seriously injured, they still insisted on climbing out. Then, they touched the ground outside the cage with their faces and began to sob silently. After everyone was released, a few men who looked tall but had been starved to the point that they were emaciated came to Tangjin and knelt on the ground with a plop sound, paying their respects to him. Tangjin was just about to stand up and refuse when he saw all the wanderers that had been released kneeling on the ground and kowtowing to him. Tangjin, who felt a little suffocated in his heart, did not help them up in the end. He merely received their kowtows with an expressionless face. However, everyone noticed that his fists were clenched tighter and tighter, continuously emitting a crack-crack sound. After the wanderers stood up, Tangjin spoke to the brawny man who was the leader. "I'm the Lord of Holy Dragon City. If you don't have a place to make a living, you can work at my place. I'll provide food and shelter, and you don't have to worry about being harassed by monsters." When everyone heard this, they were first stunned, then their faces were filled with joy. They lowered their heads and talked. They had just escaped from death, and now they had a place to eat and take refuge. The successive surprises made them suspect that they were in a dream. The brawny man was not in a hurry to celebrate. Instead, he asked Tangjin about the specific location of the Holy Dragon City before he silently retreated to the side. Tangjin glanced at the brawny man before turning around and activating the all-round digital battle interface. Through the communication interface, he contacted Tyson. "Bring your men to the direction where we chased the insect thieves last time. There's a lake here, and I saved a group of wanderers here." Just as Tangjin's words fell, Tyson complained, "City Lord, if I were to bring people to that location, it would take at least half a day. It's still fine during the day, but at night, Huan." Tangjin interrupted Tyson's words and asked, "Why did you take so long? You don't know how to drive, Ying." Tangjin's words came to an abrupt end. He suddenly remembered that the Holy Dragon City's walls did not have a gate yet. The car could not drive out at all. If he had known about this earlier, he would have opened the city gate. Tangjin scratched his head. Just as he was regretting that he shouldn't have been too careful, he suddenly recalled that other than these wanderers, he also planned to bring the Metal Research Laboratory back. However, how was he supposed to transport such a huge building back? After thinking about it, it seemed like he could only use the terrain transformation plugin, which was a gold gobbler. In the end, Tangjin still opened a passage on the city wall of the Holy Dragon City. Otherwise, it would be too inconvenient to travel. At the same time, he also added a sliding gate to the city gate. The entire city gate was made of thick and heavy steel plates, and there was a slide at the bottom. Once it was closed, 3 sides were embedded into the wall, and the bottom was held in place by 12 iron rods as thick as a child's arm. It was extremely strong, and even a heavy truck would not be able to break it easily. The problem of the city gate was left to the residents of the Holy Dragon City to deal with. Tangjin led Taiseng and the rest to start all the cars in the Holy Dragon City and pull back the hundreds of wanderers that were imprisoned by the insect bandits. However, when they were pulling people in, Taiseng pointed to a woman in a cloak and asked Tangjin, "How should we deal with this alien?" Tangjin glanced at the woman. She had unkempt hair and a dirty face, and she was no different from an ordinary wanderer. He had no idea how Taiseng could tell that the woman was a foreign race. Tangjin retracted his gaze and said to Taiseng, "If they're enemies, kill them. If they're neutral, do as you see fit." Taiseng nodded his head and ordered his men to help the woman onto a carriage before calling for everyone to set off. The mighty fleet of cars slowly left. After an hour, Tangjin activated the terrain transformation plugin and circled the surrounding area of the lake. Then, he immediately ran. As he ran, the entire lake and the surrounding desert seemed to have grown legs. They began to closely follow behind Tangjin, stirring up a cloud of dust. Tangjin, who had a level 5 cultivation, could run a distance of nearly 4 kilometers in a minute. Coupled with the map teleportation plugin, he only needed a few days to get the underground space under the lake to the Holy Dragon City. After sleeping in the open for a few days, Tangjin finally shifted his target to the back of the Holy Dragon City. This wasn't the end. Tangjin, who had a bulging wallet, used the Terrain Transformation plugin to circle the area 10 kilometers behind the Holy Dragon City and use the steep mountains as a barrier. From now on, this place would be the Holy Dragon City's backyard, mainly used for planting and breeding. In this way, it could greatly alleviate the food supply problem. This series of actions took Tangjin nearly 20 days. When he finally finished, the entire Sacred Dragon Valley had completely changed. Tangjin's hard work and gold coins were not in vain. The current Holy Dragon Valley had become even tidier and more beautiful. It was filled with vitality everywhere. Every morning, after the residents had breakfast, they would put on clean clothes and go to work. With their efforts in construction, the peach blossom spring in the wasteland was changing every day, and laughter was everywhere. Currently, the number of residents in the Holy Dragon City had already exceeded 1,000. To Tangjin, this was a very meaningful matter. It made him feel that what he was doing was not meaningless. The wanderers that were rescued the last time were all young and strong. After they were brought back to the Holy Dragon City for inspection for a period of time, Tangjin allowed them to join the Holy Dragon City, making these people grateful. Now, everyone was working hard to make themselves worthy of this trust. Tangjin, who finally had some free time, began to stroll around the Sacred Dragon Valley. However, no matter where he went, a girl wearing a black leather jacket and leather pants would follow behind him. She looked just like Tangjin's shadow. Tangjin turned his head and glanced at the fellow beside him, who was even more beautiful than a woman. He could not help but curse Tai-Sing in his heart. He was the foreign woman that they had brought back from the bug thieves' lair. It was only when he was giving the stinky wanderers a bath that everyone realized that he was actually a man. What a beautiful face, what a perfect figure, he was simply the best among women, but this guy was a good man. At that time, everyone's eyes fell out of their sockets in shock. What was even more unacceptable was that this guy was clearly a man, but his character was as soft as water, with a look of pity, and his movements were almost no different from that of a woman. "You're courting death." Tai-Sing, who had planned to give him to Tangjin as a maid, couldn't wait to throw him over. When Tangjin saw the disdainful expression on that fellow's face, he immediately gave him a hard kick in the butt. "You think it's disgusting, but do you think I'm not worried? What does this mean? Does he not take the city lord seriously? You're Xuanji Yuelang, right? You said you're a half-elf and have been to the Royal Elven City. Can you tell me what you've seen there?" Tangjin walked on the back valley's main road that had just been opened up as he asked the beautiful fellow behind him. The half-elf named Yuelang immediately laughed and replied with a bell-like voice, "Since the city lord wants to hear it, then I'll tell you." This coquettish voice caused Tangjin's entire body to shiver. He forcefully resisted the urge to hit her and revealed an expression of being all ears. The elven capital is the holy city in the hearts of all elves. This city is a massive world tree, and countless elves live around it. At the same time, there are other races from the endless wilderness who admire the beauty and prosperity of the elven capital and live around it all year round, unwilling to leave. I've heard people say that the elven race's buildings are all connected to the world tree, so they'll suffer losses together. That's why the elven race is the most united and arrogant. There are very few races that they treat with respect. In addition, the proportion of holy masters in the elves was very high, and the cultivator team was also very famous. Ordinary foreign races and monsters did not dare to cause trouble in the areas controlled by the elves, or they would be severely punished. Humans don't have a good life in the Fairy Clan's territory, and most of them are treated as slaves. Since the fairy clan hates dirty things, they won't allow wanderers to exist in their territory. Yu Lang spoke with great energy, and Tang Jin also listened attentively. It didn't take long for the two of them to arrive in front of a large piece of land. This was a piece of fertile land that Tang Jin had moved using the terrain transformation plugin. Now, it had been cultivated and various grain crops were planted. As far as the eye could see, the fields were filled with busy Holy Dragon City residents who were fertilizing and watering. Tang Jin looked for a while before turning to Yu Lang and asking, "Since you've been to so many places, then tell me, how does Holy Dragon City compare to those places?" Yu Lang chuckled upon hearing this. He looked at Tang Jin and shook his head. "City Lord, there's no way to compare. Those towers have their own races to rely on, so it's understandable for them to be prosperous and powerful. Holy Dragon City, on the other hand, was built by you. The starting points of the two are completely different. Although the Holy Dragon City is still very weak, it is the city with the greatest potential for development that I have ever seen. With you here, I think that it is very possible for the Holy Dragon City to be promoted to a level 10 city." After witnessing Tang Jin's magical ability for the past few days, Yu Lang was shocked by Tang Jin. These words were said from the bottom of his heart. It was also because of this that Yu Lang, who had half-elven bloodline and a trace of pride in his bones, was willing to serve Tang Jin. In the hearts of the elves, they were the noblest race. Even if they were half-elven, they were still much nobler than the lowly humans. If Tang Jin was an ordinary human city lord, even if Yu Lang was submissive to his tyrannical abuse of power, his heart would still be filled with contempt. How could he be as humble and respectful as he was now? The source of this content n/o/v/l/n. Strength determined everything, and it was the same everywhere. At the entrance of the Flashing Gold Race's sanctuary, Tang Jin watched as the residents carried out bundles of golden cloth. He curiously walked forward, planning to see what was going on. After seeing Tang Jin walk over, the residents immediately greeted him. After Tang Jin gestured for everyone to dispense with the formalities, he carefully examined the golden cloth. This kind of cloth felt very soft in his hand and was no different from ordinary cloth. However, when Tang Jin forcefully tore it, he discovered that the toughness of this cloth was simply beyond his imagination. Tang Jin's curiosity was piqued. He immediately used the purple electric short sword to cut off a large piece of cloth. After conducting electricity, burning, soaking in water, and acid corrosion, he was able to figure out the properties of this cloth. At the same time, he was able to confirm that the material used to weave this golden cloth was a special kind of insulating metal thread. "Where did you get these metal cloths, and how many are there in total?" Tang Jin found the foreman and asked. "My lord, these metal cloths were moved out from the 3rd floor of the sanctuary. There are more than 500 bundles in total. The ones that were moved out earlier have already been stored in the warehouse. These are the last batch. T/his chapter is up.d by nvel bin.co/m." The foreman was very respectful, and he answered the questions in a straightforward manner. Tang Jin nodded when he heard this. He secretly thought that if this kind of metal cloth was used to make clothes, it would be an extremely good material. It could completely block the penetration of ordinary arrows and greatly increase the defense of soldiers. The Flashing Gold clan had a lot of good things. This kind of metal cloth was very good. When he had time, he would ask the queen of the Flashing Gold clan about the weaving and sewing method of this metal cloth. If it wasn't too troublesome, Tang Jin was prepared to make more for storage. The figure of the queen of the Flashing Gold race flashed in front of his eyes. Tang Jin's expression was serious. He did not dare to let his guard down against this mysterious and strange woman. He did not believe that this woman would compromise so easily. She might be brewing some scheme in her heart, waiting for him to jump into the pit. The queen of the flashing gold race had returned to the fourth underground floor. The space on the upper 3 floors had been vacated for the Holy Dragon City to clean up. However, no one from the Holy Dragon City had entered the fourth underground floor so far. The body for the soul to reside in had yet to be fully cultivated. Tangjin was not in a hurry to have a showdown with the queen of the flashing gold race. He intended to give this woman a chance. If she was still stubborn and wanted to plot against the Holy Dragon City, Tangjin would not mind letting the flashing gold race become history. As for the mechanical puppets of the flashing gold race, Tangjin had also researched some names and found a way to restrain them. However, he was not sure about the specific effects. While Tangjin was racking his brain to think of a way to deal with the queen of the flashing gold race, in the base of the United States in Kimchi Country, more than a dozen military senior officials and some military experts were gathered together, discussing their latest findings with serious faces. Through the analysis of the samples collected from the dock last time, we found several unknown substances in it. We can basically confirm that they don't belong to Earth. In addition, a strand of hair was found at the scene. After analysis, it should belong to some unknown creature. This creature's muscle density is extremely high, and I believe it is an extremely powerful beast. After the expert finished speaking, he nodded and looked at the information in his hand. Another expert spoke. He pointed at the content displayed on the screen and said, "The mysterious theft at the dock and the missing container are the same as the theft at the arsenal at the military base. I believe they're all done by the same organization. According to the information we've received, a similar thing has happened in the Ice Bear Alliance, but they're very strict with keeping information confidential. So far, we haven't gotten enough information, but we think there must be a connection between the two." After the expert finished speaking, a man in a black suit said, "We've already sent out our elites, and I believe it won't be long before we get valuable information. However, this time it involves supernatural forces and unknown creatures. Should we invite more experts in this area to cooperate with the investigation?" The military has already contacted a few experts in this area and they're on their way. I believe that. Before the officer could finish his sentence, there was a knock on the door. Then, an officer walked in and said to everyone, "An unknown energy has appeared at the dock. The special forces stationed there have begun to move. The current situation is unknown." Tangjin, who had activated the quantum invisibility light screen, walked out from the grass. He dusted off the dust on his body and began to slowly move along the road. This time, he returned to his original world to purchase some sewing machines and other things. Who knew that as soon as he completed the teleportation, a group of fully armed soldiers rushed over, and the target was the position he was teleported to. Tangjin, who saw the scene, immediately realized that he had been caught by the tail. It made sense when he thought about it. Bizarre theft cases had occurred one after another at this dock, and the method was the same as the incident at the military base. It would be strange if the other party did not use the method of waiting for the rabbit to come out of the tree stump. Without saying anything, he directly activated the minimum teleportation plugin and ran to the side of the road several kilometers away in the blink of an eye. He would just let those guys torment themselves. It would be a miracle if they could find him. As he thought about this, Jin Tang took out his phone and dialed the number of the young man he had chosen as the purchaser. Unfortunately, after calling twice, the other party's phone was turned off. She had told him to turn on his phone all day long so that she could contact him easily. Now, this guy had turned off his phone. Could it be that he had run away with the money? The gold was worth a lot, and he wondered if this guy had any ill intentions. Tangjin thought for a moment before activating the all-purpose electronic kit and began to search for the location of the phone. At the same time, he forcefully turned it on and opened the call mode. When Tangjin turned on the application, in a room in a remote corner of the city, a mobile phone placed on the table suddenly turned on. Its screen flashed and then fell into darkness, but the communication and camera functions were already turned on. At the same time, a three-dimensional map of the city appeared in front of Tangjin's eyes. The red dot on the map indicated the location of the mobile phone. The camera was turned on. Tangjin could only see darkness, but there were intermittent sounds transmitted over. A few men who spoke in Kimchi language were talking in low voices. The content of their discussion involved information, remuneration, plans, and other words. Perhaps it was because they were too far away from the phone, Tangjin could only hear a rough idea. All of this wasn't important. Tangjin only needed to determine the location of the phone and directly kill his way in. Tangjin called a taxi and directly rushed to the location marked on the map. The taxi finally stopped on a street that was filled with low-rise buildings. Tangjin walked down from the taxi and swept his gaze over the surrounding environment. He tidied up the wind coat that was used to cover his cloak before walking out of the street. After walking along the winding alley for a while, Tangjin stopped in front of a two-story building. He planned to push the door and enter, but he discovered that the courtyard door was tightly locked. He took out the purple lightning short sword, inserted it into the gap of the door, and made a cut. The lock on the door was easily cut off, and Tangjin stepped into the small courtyard. A brawny man came out to take a look after hearing the sound of the door opening. He immediately saw Tangjin standing in the courtyard. His expression changed as his right hand quickly reached for his waist. However, just as his fingers touched the gun handle, he was knocked unconscious by Tangjin's punch. Stepping over the brawny man, Tangjin entered the house. When he saw another two men with weapons coming over, he immediately fell to the ground and went straight to the cell phone in the room. On the messy table, there was a black mobile phone. It was the young man's communication tool. However, the mobile phone was here, but the young man was nowhere to be found. Tangjin looked at his phone, and an ominous feeling suddenly gushed out in his heart. Putting away his phone, Tangjin dragged a man lying on the ground to the sink, turned on the tap, and poured water on him. After being splashed by the cold water, that person immediately woke up. He dizzily wiped his face and immediately started to struggle. Unfortunately, Tangjin's hand was as hard as iron and he was unable to break free. Where did the owner of this phone go? Tangjin took out his phone and waved it as he asked the man. The man, whose face was covered in water, had a fierce expression as he roared at Tangjin, "Who the F***ck are you? Do you think I won't kill you?" Tangjin sneered when he heard this. He took a badly maintained pistol from the man's waist and stared at his head as he coldly said, "Don't talk to me with such an attitude, or you'll lose your life." Feeling the killing intent from the cold muzzle, the man finally calmed down and said in a low voice, "That guy knew a lot about us. The boss asked us to kill him just to be safe. His body is in the basement, and we haven't had time to deal with it yet." Tangjin's expression was grave as he nodded his head. He knocked the man unconscious with the butt of his gun and casually threw him on the ground. In the basement, Tangjin's face was filled with unwillingness as his eyes widened when he saw the young man's body. Tangjin patted the young man's face and shook his head. "You're really unlucky, kid. You just met me, a rich man, and before you could get rich, you were killed. You must be full of grievances before you died, right?" The dead couldn't speak. Tangjin's behavior was just a kind of dark humor with a hint of self-mockery. Although this young man had not followed him for a long time, he was still considered his subordinate. Tangjin's heart was naturally filled with anger when he was killed just like that. However, before this, he still wanted to see if this unlucky fellow's soul had dissipated. If his soul was still there, Tangjin had the confidence to resurrect him. If it had already dissipated, Tangjin would be helpless. He took out a pistol and opened a hole in the young man's head. Tangjin put a brain bead in and took it out 10 minutes later. However, he found that only less than half of his soul power had been injected. Tang Jin shook his head. The young man had been dead for too long, and more than half of his soul had already dissipated. Even if he was resurrected, he would most likely be a fool with incomplete intelligence. There was no meaning in doing this. After looking at the brain in his hand and thinking for a while, Tang Jin opened the application store. After searching for a while, he found an application. Spirit Body Seeker, able to scan all spirit bodies within a set range. It also indicates the spirit body's energy strength and type. Download price, 20,000 gold coins. This application belongs to the Fantasy Secret Technique category. Tang Jin had long read the introduction about it, but he had never had the opportunity to use it. Now, it seemed that he could use it. Although the download price wasn't cheap, when he thought about how he had to rely on this thing to collect the young man's scattered soul, he was afraid that he would need it more in the future. Tang Jin immediately paid the gold coins and chose to download and install it. After the application was activated, a gloomy and terrifying interface immediately appeared in front of Tang Jin's vision. It was as if the entire world had turned into the netherworld. It made people shiver with fear. According to the application's explanation, the scene that Tang Jin was seeing now was the world where his soul was. It existed as a part of the normal world and was not seen by others. Because of the existence of resentment, it was filled with desolation and loneliness. This was a strange world that looked extremely terrifying. After Tang Jin walked one round around the house that was constantly emitting black smoke, he entered the soul fluctuation of the young man and began to search. Like a radar wave, a green halo constantly spread out with Tang Jin as the center. It passed through the buildings that were constantly emitting black smoke and spread to an extremely far place. Not long after, a green dot of light appeared in front of Tang Jin. Tang Jin glanced at the location on the map and immediately rushed towards the location of the target. He had to race against time for this kind of thing, so his speed was very fast. In less than 5 minutes, Tang Jin had already appeared in a remote alley. In Tang Jin's eyes, this small alley that was extremely ordinary in the eyes of an ordinary person was actually a place filled with strange scenes. Many strange things were entrenched here. The faintly discernible spiritual body of the young man was standing here with a blank and ignorant face. Tang Jin stepped forward and touched the young man's forehead with the bead of the brain in his hand. The young man's spirit body was immediately absorbed into the bead of the brain. Tang Jin shook his head. He swept a glance at those strange things that were restless before he turned around and left the small alley. There were too many secrets in the world. Tang Jin was not interested in being an old pedant. He had to figure out everything that he didn't understand. As long as it had nothing to do with him, Tang Jin was not interested in it. After obtaining the first scattered spirit body, another green dot of light appeared in Tang Jin's field of vision. However, this green dot of light was a little far away. It seemed to be at the other end of the city. Tang Jin got into a taxi and ran towards his destination. After passing through the bustling city and running for a while, Tang Jin finally arrived at his destination. This was a very high-end villa. The greenery inside was very good, exquisite and pleasant, but the high walls and courtyard blocked the view inside. Tang Jin stood at the door and took a look. He then jumped in and went straight to the location of the young spirit body. After sneaking into the villa's room, Tang Jin saw the young man's spirit body. However, at this moment, he was blankly looking at a woman who was sleeping on the sofa. His wooden face seemed to be filled with something called happiness. Tang Jin glanced at the woman and discovered that her appearance was not bad. She was gentle and moving. Her figure was also very well proportioned. No wonder the young man's spirit body was unable to take his eyes off her. This young man's spirit body didn't go anywhere but this woman's house. There was obviously a reason he didn't know. Could it be that he had been secretly in love with this woman and was brought here by his obsession after his death? Tang Jin was not in the mood to investigate this gossip. He walked forward and kept the young man's spirit body. At this time, the brain was already filled with soul power and could be used to complete the secret technique of soul lodging. Tang Jin was just about to turn around and leave when he saw a slightly chubby man walk into the room. He was first stunned when he saw Tang Jin. Immediately after, he was about to open his mouth and shout, but unfortunately, Tang Jin smashed a teacup at him and directly fainted on the ground. After walking out of the villa, Tang Jin stood on the side of the street and waited for a car. He was prepared to run his own errands and collect the materials needed to resurrect the young man. Tang Jin, who was waiting for the car, didn't notice that a black car was passing by not far from him. It quickly turned back and slowly stopped by the roadside. A woman wearing black sports attire with a hat covering her head and a pair of color-changing glasses on her face jumped out of the car. She slowly walked over from a direction that Tang Jin couldn't see. Tang Jin casually took out a cigarette. He had just lit it when he felt a hard object pressing against his back. At the same time, a low shout was transmitted into his ear, "Don't move, or I'll shoot." Tang Jin was startled. From the map view, he saw the woman standing behind him and the gun she was pointing at him. "Officer Han, what a coincidence!" Tang Jin held a cigarette in his mouth and laughed. His face was filled with disapproval. He was wearing a black cloak and was not afraid of being shot by such a gun. Tang Jin's original plan was to take action and restrain the other party before leaving. However, when Tang Jin remembered the organization that had killed the young man, he decided to fill in the gaps and let the Kimchi police deal with them. Most up-to-date novels are published on n0velgen.co/m. If it wasn't because he didn't have any free time, this matter would have been personally handled by Tang Jin. Cut the crap. Put your hands behind your head and squat on the ground. Officer Han, who was holding a gun, didn't dare to be careless in front of Tang Jin. She was very clear about the strength of the man in front of her. When they were at the dock, 5 or 6 big men couldn't get close to him. Once he found an opportunity, she might be countered by him. Thinking of the scene of being controlled by Tang Jin last time, Police Officer Han had a lingering fear. After that, they investigated through the documents that Tang Jin showed and found out that he was a mental patient who had been missing for 3 years. His family had been looking for him, but there was no news of him. They didn't expect him to suddenly appear near the dock. This guy was a patient, and he would go crazy once he was provoked. He had to be extra careful. Police Officer Han secretly reminded herself, afraid that Tang Jin would make any strange movements. Although she held a gun in her hand, she was still very nervous. The hand holding the gun was also slightly trembling. Tang Jin raised his hand slightly. After which, he turned his head to look at Officer Han and said with a smile, "You don't have to be so nervous, I'll just cooperate with you." Seeing Tang Jin turn his head, Police Officer Han involuntarily took a step back. After thinking for a moment, he threw out the handcuffs and said to Tang Jin, "Handcuff yourself and don't play any tricks, or I'll really shoot." "Okay, I'll do as you say." Tang Jin laughed softly as he used the tip of his foot to hook the handcuffs. He buckled them on his wrists and looked at Police Officer Han. "I've cuffed it up. You should be at ease now." Police Officer Han secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He lowered the muzzle of his gun slightly and pointed at Tang Jin, "Don't play any tricks. Squat on the ground and wait." After that, Officer Han took out his mobile phone and was ready to find someone to help him. "Officer Han, aren't you curious why I'm here?" Officer Han, who was about to make a call, said casually, "Why?" "Because the group of people you're chasing has kidnapped my friend. I have half an hour to get there, or they'll kill my friend." Friend? And you still say you don't know him? Police Officer Han put down the phone and said to Tangjin, "Who's on the phone? Where is he? I don't know who they are. They just gave me an address and told me to be there in time. But looking at the time, they should be here soon." Tangjin shrugged his shoulders and feigned a helpless expression. Police Officer Han grabbed Tangjin, but Tangjin didn't move at all. She was the one who was dodged. She cursed in her heart. Police Officer Han pointed at Tangjin and said, "Get in the car with me now, we're going to save your friend." Follow US stories at nvl/by/n.com. I'm sorry, but can you do it? Tangjin sized up Officer Han with a suspicious look. Good figure. Being swept by Tangjin's invasive gaze made Officer Han feel a sense of shame as if her clothes were seen through. This made her feel quite uncomfortable. She snorted coldly and shouted at Tangjin, "Cut the crap. Get in the car." Tangjin obediently got into the car when he heard that. After Officer Han warned Tangjin not to move, he immediately started the car and went straight to the second floor where Tangjin had been before. As Police Officer Han drove, he monitored Tangjin behind him, afraid that Tangjin would do something. Tangjin, on the other hand, had a comfortable expression on his face as he lazily laid on the back seat. After glancing at the identification on the car, he said to Police Officer Han, "Officer Han Yen, please focus on driving, or I'll really have to take the wheel and drive for you." After the female police officer heard Tangjin call out her name, she rolled her eyes in a bad mood and shouted at Tangjin, "Be good, or I'll deal with you right now." Tangjin let out a tisk sound. His face was filled with disdain as he curled his mouth. The female police officer's driving skills were pretty good. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the place where the young man was killed. Tangjin jumped out of the car with her. The female police officer threatened him with a gun, but Tangjin didn't fall for it. Han Yen had no choice but to let Tangjin follow her. The three guys that Tangjin had knocked down hadn't recovered yet, so Han Yen didn't use any strength to tie up all three of them and call for help. However, after she was done with all of this, she discovered that Tangjin had disappeared. Han Yen looked around but didn't find any trace of Tangjin. She was so angry that her body trembled and she kept cursing Tangjin. However, just as she turned around and was about to walk into the courtyard, she felt someone pounce on her from behind and press her to the ground. Before she could resist, she heard gunshots and bullets flying past where she had just been standing. Han Yen was shocked. If she hadn't been pressed down in time, she would probably have been shot by now. She turned around and saw Tangjin getting up from her body. He even reached out and smacked Han Yen's perky butt. Feeling pain and numbness in her butt, Han Yen wrinkled her nose and cursed pervert in her heart. She immediately got up from the ground to find cover and took out her weapon to fight back. Tangjin was also hiding in a corner. He was observing the situation outside through the view of the map. At this moment, there were 6 people who had entered the courtyard and were attempting to enter the house. A man holding a short-barreled hunting rifle carefully pushed open the door. He was just about to poke his head in when Tangjin kicked the door. The man's face was covered in blood as he fell unconscious in the courtyard. Seeing that their companion had been ambushed, the remaining 5 people immediately rushed to the window and shot randomly into the room. Han Yen couldn't lift her head from the pressure. Tangjin picked up a leather shoe from the ground and smashed it at a man outside the window. The strength of a level 5 cultivator was no joke. Even if Tangjin restrained his strength, he still sent the man flying. Since he wanted to act, he had to act more realistically. Otherwise, Tangjin would send this group of people to heaven in less than half a minute. Seeing that another comrade had been killed, the remaining 4 panicked and quickly squatted down to avoid the attack. Tang Jin took the opportunity to quickly run to the place where Han Yen was hiding. When he passed by the three men who were tied up, Tang Jin pulled out a gun from one of the men's waist and said to the nervous Han Yen, "Let's go to the second floor. It's safer there." "No, there are suspects here, we can't let them take them away." Han Yen didn't move and continued to stare outside. Tang Jin patted her butt again, making Han Yen so angry that her eyebrows were raised. She fiercely bared her teeth at Tang Jin and said, "You bastard, if you do this again, I'll blow up your D***ck. Tang Jin revealed a "I'm so scared" expression, but his movements did not stop. He raised both his arms and fired a shot at the door. A blood-curdling scream rang out. Tang Jin's shot had pierced through the door and hit the person's abdomen. 3 of their companions had been taken down in succession, causing the remaining 3 to become timid. They were hesitating whether to continue the attack or to evacuate directly to avoid further casualties. In the corner of the room, Han Yen looked at Tang Jin in surprise. She snatched his gun and coldly snorted at Tang Jin, "You better behave yourself, who told you to shoot?" Tang Jin didn't pay attention to Han Yen. Through the map, he saw a few police cars rushing over. They would arrive in a minute. With such a short amount of time left, the remaining 3 people probably wouldn't be able to escape. Since the attention of the Pickle Nation's police had been attracted, Tang Jin could finally retreat. While Han Yen's attention was focused on the outside, Tang Jin jumped up to the second floor, activated the quantum invisibility, and jumped onto the street outside. After cutting open the tires of the cars of these fellows with the purple lightning short sword, Tang Jin looked at the police cars that were speeding over and turned around to leave in satisfaction. A day later, in a certain block. "This is half a year's rent and security deposit. Please check it." Tang Jin smiled as he handed a stack of brand new cash to the middle-aged woman in front of him. After chatting for a while, he sized up the surrounding environment and nodded in satisfaction. He had previously used the all-purpose electronic kit to check the rental information of the city's houses and found this house that was currently being rented. The environment and location were very suitable for him, so Tang Jin used forged documents to rent this house. The house was huge and had a basement, enough for him to set up the rebirth altar. After the female landlord left, Tang Jin began to clean the basement. At the same time, he found someone to install a strong anti-theft door before going to the market to purchase. The materials needed for the rebirth altar were quite a lot. Tang Jin busied himself for half a day before he finally purchased all of them. For convenience's sake, he even bought a second-hand pickup truck. As for his ID, he could use the virtual reality simulator to get through. After bringing the materials he bought back to his residence, Tang Jin went back to the basement and started to set up the rebirth altar. Get latest level CHPTers on nve.lbj/n.c/m. Tang Jin was very familiar with this kind of thing. However, this time around, he had changed it to a modular layout. It was very convenient regardless of whether it was dismantling or assembling. The reason why he did this was naturally to make it convenient for him to pack up and escape in the future. After being busy for 3 hours, Tang Jin finally finished setting up the altar. Next, he only needed to obtain a suitable body in order to help the young man complete his rebirth. The body cultivated by the mother tree was about to mature, and Tang Jin was not in a hurry. Therefore, the matter of rebirth could wait for a few days. Before that, Tang Jin still had other things to do. He tried to contact Ivanov and the others again, but there was still no response. It was even possible that his mobile phone had been destroyed, so Tang Jin could not lock onto their specific location. This bunch of useless guys can't even handle such a small matter. Tang Jin cursed as he sat down on the sofa. He held a teacup in his hand as he watched the program on the television and enjoyed a rare leisure time. Now that the Holy Dragon City had already repelled the enemy that had surrounded them, it was time for him to show off his extraordinary abilities. Tangjin would definitely not be satisfied if he did not beat up the corpse race and the dog-headed people until he was afraid of pain. I've been bullied by this bunch of foreign bastards for so long, it's time for me to get back at them. To do a good job, one must first sharpen his tools. Tangjin had a deep understanding of this saying. If not for the weapons from the original world that he had obtained, the Holy Dragon City would not have been able to hold on until now. It might have even been destroyed several times. This time, he planned to get some transport vehicles suitable for the Holy Dragon City. At the same time, he would also modify these vehicles into special combat vehicles. Through an online search, Tangjin ordered 20 high-performance heavy trucks. They were available in stock, and Tangjin could pay for them at any time. Due to the lack of equipment in the Holy Dragon City, Tangjin could only choose to carry out the modification in Kimchi Country. After driving around, he finally contacted a car modification factory and agreed to place the 20 cars there for modification. The scope of the modification included the safety protection of the driver's seat, the protection of the tires, the modification of the rear compartment, the mounting of weapons, and other aspects. It was not too complicated, but it was not simple either. In addition to modifying the car, Tangjin also needed to store enough fuel and buy some easily damaged parts for backup. In the blink of an eye, 6 or 7 days had passed. Early in the morning, Tangjin was about to drive out again. There were too many things to do. Tangjin's feet barely touched the ground. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. The cars had basically been modified, and the other things that needed to be prepared were almost ready. Tangjin only needed to bring these cars back to the Luching world. "Good morning, uncle." A clear and melodious voice sounded from not far away. Tangjin, who had just opened the car door, turned his head and took a look. He smiled and replied, "You too." This was a 17 or 18-year-old girl who lived next door to Tangjin's rented house. The two of them had met a few times in front of the house and became familiar with each other after a while. Tangjin didn't know the girl's name and had never asked. He only felt that her smile was very good-looking and gave people a pleasant feeling. To ordinary people, he was destined to be a passerby. If he came into contact with them too much, not only would it bring trouble to them, but it would also bring inconvenience to himself. Therefore, Tangjin had been subconsciously avoiding contact with strangers. The girl might only be curious about Tangjin, this uncle who rented a large house by himself and left early in the morning and returned late every day. They were all neighbors, so it was normal to greet each other when they met. "Do you need me to send you to school?" "It's on the way." Tangjin was only being polite out of habit. He did not expect the girl to immediately walk over and sit in the front passenger seat. "Then thank you, uncle." After saying that, she even smiled sweetly, causing Tangjin, who was secretly scolding himself for being talkative, to be helpless. He could only start the car with a smile. The car slowly moved along the road while the girl was chatting with Tangjin. "Uncle, what's your job?" "As long as I can earn money, I'll do anything." Tangjin was expressionless. "Then wouldn't uncle be unprincipled?" the girl pouted. The corner of Tangjin's mouth twitched. "Ingluo, it's still all right." "And NBSP. Uncle, don't you feel lonely and scared living in such a big house by yourself?" the girl asked. "You'll get used to it." Tangjin's face was filled with black lines. The girl's eyes lit up. "Are you single, uncle? Do you want me to introduce you to a girlfriend?" "Ha, are you embarrassed?" "It's okay, it's a deal." Tangjin, Ingluo. "Damn it, when did I promise you anything?" After the girl finally got off the car, Tangjin heaved a long sigh of relief. He thought to himself that his ears could finally be quiet for a while. However, in the blink of an eye, Tangjin gently smiled again. He did not know why, but the conversation earlier had made him feel very relaxed and his mood was also very happy. The merciless killing in the other world and the wandering in his original world had always kept his nerves in a tense state. The higher the position and power, the more the strength increased, the further Tangjin felt that the distance between him and ordinary people was. This kind of feeling was intoxicating, but it was also very easy for him to feel lonely. This was because he had no way to communicate with others normally. Most of the time, he could only bury his happiness, anger, and sorrow in his heart. There were always losses for everything, but as long as he was willing, what did it matter how hard and tiring it was? Tangjin arrived at the place where the cars were modified. He looked at the row of cars that were parked in the courtyard and nodded his head in satisfaction. The modified truck was completely different. However, in Tangjin's opinion, it was the most suitable vehicle for the Holy Dragon City. After all, it was easy to operate and did not require too much maintenance. The last time at the military base, Tangjin had considered whether to get a tank, but in the end, he dismissed this idea. This kind of land god of war was not easy to operate, and the requirements for logistics were too high. The Holy Dragon City could not afford to support it at the moment. After finding the boss of the factory, Tangjin paid the rest of the money and told the boss to pick up the car at night and remind the workers responsible for the night watch. After the boss counted the money, he naturally agreed without hesitation. Time passed by, and Tangjin appeared in the factory at midnight. He first put sleeping pills in the food of the night watchman, making them fall asleep, and then used the Universal Electronic Kit to forge a video of a car driving out of the factory and inserted it into the surveillance video of that night. Then, he sent the modified tanks to the square in front of the Holy Dragon City. Through the map view, Tangjin watched a Xiao Feng left in his car before switching to his normal vision. Xiao Feng was a very smart young man, and he was very reliable in his work. However, he was not suitable to be a leader. Tangjin had never planned to let him take charge of the rebirth altar. This was a very serious matter and Tangjin had to be cautious. This might seem like a dangerous task for the time being, but once the test of the interplane soul transmission was completed, the humans from the original world would head to the world of Luqing on a large scale. By then, the people who were in charge of the rebirth altar would definitely receive great honor and prestige. Therefore, Tangjin would definitely not use those who did not have the ability or those who harbored evil intentions. The matters in the original world had basically been settled. The next thing Tangjin had to do was to clean up the sanctuary and wait for Black Rock City to ask for help again. He walked out and locked the courtyard door. Tangjin returned to the house and activated the teleportation. Holy Dragon City, the third underground floor of the Glitter Gold Race's sanctuary. Tangjin looked at the empty underground third floor. After confirming that there was nothing abnormal in the surroundings, he activated the Instant Teleportation Map plugin. This time, he needed to teleport down. However, the map did not show the environment of the fourth underground floor. Therefore, Tangjin did not have a clear teleportation coordinate to set. The teleportation this time was based on the general structure of the sanctuary. As for where he would be teleported to, it would depend on luck. Fortunately, this kind of teleportation wouldn't squeeze Tangjin into the stone. Otherwise, Tangjin would have to go through a lot of trouble to teleport back to his original world. After the cooldown the next day, he would open the teleportation plugin again. However, it was very likely that he would be covered in dust during the process of teleportation. Tangjin wanted to enter the fourth underground floor of the sanctuary without anyone knowing. This was the only effective way at the moment. Otherwise, if he opened the entrance to enter, it would definitely attract the attention of the Queen of the Flashing Gold Race. Then, Tangjin would definitely not be able to see what he wanted to see. Tangjin only felt his vision turn dark as he activated his teleportation. His body gently landed on the ground. He extended his hand and touched it. He confirmed that he had successfully entered the 4th underground floor. Full 0W current novels on n/o/v/3l/b in.co/m. After quickly activating the quantum invisibility light screen, Tangjin opened the all-round digital battle interface and carefully explored. The 4th underground floor was also a spacious space. Tangjin walked around a few times and did not find any traces of monsters. God knows where the Queen of the Flashing Gold race had taken those monsters. After confirming that there was no abnormality on the 4th underground floor, Tangjin checked the passage to the 5th underground floor and was surprised to find that the passage was not closed. Tangjin was overjoyed. This way, he didn't have to wait for the cooldown and his investigation speed could be much faster. After carefully entering the 5th underground floor, Tangjin could smell the unique smell of monsters. It seemed that there should be monsters appearing on this floor. What Tangjin didn't expect was that there still weren't any monsters on the entire 5th underground floor. Instead, the ground was covered in traces of blood and minced meat. They were dried up and black, as if they had existed for a very long time. Tangjin looked at the dirt on the ground. His expression was silent and he revealed a thoughtful expression. The situation in the Flashing Gold race's sanctuary was really strange and completely beyond Tangjin's expectations. Could it be that the Queen of the Flashing Gold race was right? She had imprisoned all the monsters at the bottom of the sanctuary? Unfortunately, Tangjin didn't believe the Queen of the Flashing Gold race. He thought that this woman was very scheming and that there must be some unspeakable secrets hidden in the sanctuary. After stopping for over 10 minutes, Tangjin headed to a deeper space once again, planning to explore it. On the 6th underground floor, he found the same bloodstains. Compared to the situation on the previous floor, this floor was more messy. Many metal objects had traces of fighting and cutting. These traces clearly indicated that an unusually intense battle had taken place here. Tangjin had a faint guess in his heart. However, he needed more evidence to prove it. Therefore, Tangjin continued to head deeper into the forest. Like a night walker, he was passing through the gloomy ghost's domain. He passed through the water supply area, the energy area, the living area, and many areas with unknown uses. Tangjin was already close to the bottom of the sanctuary. During this time, he did not encounter a single monster, but more and more clues supported his guess, which made his face more and more gloomy. The Queen of the Flashing Gold race didn't know what was good for her. She must have set a trap for him. Ka-ba. A soft sound was transmitted over, causing Tangjin, who was moving forward, to stop in his tracks. His eyes were fixed in the direction of the sound. A glitter gold race monster was slowly walking along the passage. It was wearing a set of soft armor-like clothing, and its expression was ferocious and terrifying. It seemed no different from an ordinary monster. In the monster's hand, there seemed to be a stack of golden paper, which was full of runes and patterns. Tangjin hid in the dark and quietly looked at this monster. He felt that this monster was not simple. If one looked closely at the monster's eyes, they would be able to discover something different. This was because the monster's eyes were constantly moving, and they shone with the light of wisdom. After seeing the performance of this Flashing Gold tribe monster, Tangjin remembered that the Queen of the Flashing Gold tribe had once mentioned that there were other Flashing Gold tribe people who had retained their intelligence like it. It seemed that this guy was one of them. Tangjin didn't take any action. Instead, he allowed the Flashing Gold tribe monster to walk past him. The situation was still unclear, so it wasn't wise to act rashly. After the Flashing Gold tribe monster walked past, Tangjin continued to move forward. However, this time, he was more careful to avoid being discovered by the Flashing Gold tribe monsters. After walking for about 20 minutes, Tang Jin once again entered the space of the next level. This space was different from all the other spaces above. It was much larger, but in this space, there were all kinds of mechanical marionettes lined up in rows. The small ones were only the size of a fist, while the big ones were 4 to 5 meters tall. They were fully armed and looked majestic. Tang Jin carefully approached one of the mechanical puppets and used the purple electric short sword to cut it a few times. The golden outer shell of the mechanical puppet was peeled off. At the same time, his fingers hooked into the inner part of the mechanical puppet, and a golden disc embedded with several level 2 brain beads slid into his palm. Tang Jin carefully studied the golden disc and found that these level 2 brain beads were firmly fixed on it. At the same time, the disc was densely covered with golden wires. When placed into the puppet's body, these wires would connect to the wires inside the puppet. The design was simple and clear, and it was easy to tell that the power source of these puppets came from their brains. Tang Jin secretly sighed. The flashing gold race was indeed powerful. They had actually modified their puppets and used the energy of their brains on the spot. Tang Jin coldly looked at the huge number of mechanical puppets and a mocking smile appeared on his face. He had now completely figured out the plan of the queen of the flashing gold race. A woman's heart is the most vicious. This queen of the flashing gold race is quite a character. However, isn't she afraid of losing and not being able to recover by betting the fate of her entire race? Even though Tang Jin had already mentally prepared himself, he still felt fear in his heart after he had seen all the types of mechanical puppets. He could completely imagine the scene when these puppet army appeared on the ground. To the Holy Dragon City, it was a terrifying disaster. On the Holy Dragon City's wide square, a row of crude and eye-catching modified war chariots were now neatly arranged. Tai Xing led his large group of men and gathered together, surrounding the war chariot that Tang Jin had brought back last night and clicking his tongue in wonder. They were no longer strangers to cars. Now, the Holy Dragon City's soldiers were all skilled at driving, so when they first saw these chariots, Tai Xing jumped on them and started the car skillfully, circling the valley 5 to 6 times. After jumping out of the car, Tai Xing laughed out loud, saying that this car was prepared for war, and that it was a pleasure to drive it. Tang Jin watched from the side for a while before walking forward and introducing the functions of this modified war vehicle to everyone. The modified tank could be equipped with a heavy machine gun, and there were firing holes on both sides of the carriage that could be closed. At the same time, the top of the carriage was sealed with dragon bones and steel plates, which were connected to the head of the tank. The warriors needed to enter the tank through the rear carriage. The modified war chariots could transport troops quickly and provide basic protection. They could also carry powerful weapons. Tang Jin's goal had already been achieved by being able to do these. Out of the 20 combat vehicles, 15 would be used for combat. The required ammunition and weapons would be carried by the combat vehicles. Of the remaining 5, 2 were fuel tank cars, 1 was a food supply vehicle, 1 was an ambulance, and 1 was a command vehicle. The Holy Dragon City did not have many warriors at the moment, and these chariots were enough for them. The basic functions of the tank had been introduced. The next thing for the warriors to do was to install the weapons and interior, and then carry out adaptive training. The last time they were at the military base, Tang Jin had gotten quite a lot of military equipment. Now, everyone was given a set. However, when these authentic equipment were worn by the Holy Dragon City's soldiers, Tang Jin felt like he was looking at gorillas. Look at the appearance of these guys. They are wearing leather clothes, jeans, combat boots, tactical vests, and Kevlar helmets. They are completely dressed like modern soldiers, but why do they have a 2-foot-long self-made machete on their waist and 4 or 5 short javelins on their backs? Is a rifle not enough for you? This combination was fine, but what about the plate armor under the tactical vest? A bulletproof vest? And that bone cat bastard, can you *king throw away that shiny silver hat on your head? That's for matching armor, okay? Tangjin was also drunk when he saw the creative mix and match style of this group of people. He had no energy to complain about these people who were wasting good things. Tangjin asked Murongxian to find a few skillful women and let them watch the battlefield medical rescue video brought by Tangjin. He was prepared to train them to become military doctors on the battlefield. He had spent too much energy and money on this group of people. Tangjin was not willing to let this group of people die so easily. That would really be a loss. Tangjin would try his best to do what he could. As for the results, Tangjin would not force it. Before the crossplane soul transmission experiment was completed, professional technical talents had always been the resource that Tangjin lacked the most. He watched as a group of excited guys assembled weapons around the tank, and some even placed a huge six-horned monster skull on the front of the tank, making the already wasteland-style tank look even more ferocious. It looked like a perfect match. Tangjin no longer bothered with these guys and left the square. He walked all the way to the mother tree and checked the hanging fruits. Only then did he take out the purple lightning short sword and carefully cut open the outer shell of the fruit. As the cracks on the fruit gradually widened, a green liquid like egg white flowed out, and at the same time, a healthy and muscular male body was revealed. This was the soul host body that Tangjin had cultivated. There was no breathing and no soul. It was just an incomparably pure body. Tangjin examined the body for a moment. After confirming that there were no flaws, he extended his hand and kept the body into his storage space. At the same time, he activated the transmission and returned to his rented house. He took out a drink from the refrigerator and took a sip. Then, Tangjin changed into a white coat and walked into the basement while tightly locking the anti-theft door. The materials for rebirth had already been prepared. Tangjin threw the cultivated body into the blood pool and then implanted the brain bead that stored the young man's soul into the body, directly activating the rebirth altar. Tangjin was already extremely familiar with this rebirth secret technique. Even if he were to close his eyes, he would still be able to complete the entire step. As the strange light disappeared, the body in the blood pool moved and slowly opened its eyes. If you're awake, then get up quickly. Go to the bathroom to take a shower and change your clothes. Tangjin held a cigarette in his mouth as he glanced at the young man who had a blank expression and slowly said. The young man stood up from the blood pool and felt the air he breathed in. He took another look at his almost perfect body, especially the swaying thing under him, and grinned. Tangjin looked at the proud expression on the young man's face and could not help but mock, although that thing of yours can be used, it's a pity that it can't give birth. Other than making you feel good, its most important function has already disappeared. The corners of the young man's mouth twitched. He silently went upstairs and washed himself. Then, he came down in loose clothes. Boss, what's going on? The young man sat opposite Tangjin. His face was filled with curiosity and joy. Didn't I tell you that as long as you follow me, I can guarantee that you won't die? Did you think I was bragging and turn a deaf ear to it? Tangjin looked at the young man and said in an unpleasant tone. The young man smiled awkwardly and quickly explained, I was so shocked by the gold that you took out that I didn't hear what you said. You're not scared out of your mind. You're just too greedy. It's just a few pieces of gold and you're already so flustered. I really don't know if choosing you back then was a wrong decision. Tangjin shook his head with a regretful expression. The young man quickly expressed his loyalty. Boss, you have good eyes. Didn't I complete my previous missions well? This time, if it weren't for those guys who were determined to kill me, I wouldn't have been so cowardly. Tangjin waved his hand and stopped the young man from speaking. He spoke in a deep voice, I don't care about your past. From now on, you're a different person. Your past life has nothing to do with you. The price of resurrecting you is not small, so I hope you do your best in your job. Otherwise, if I can resurrect you, I can naturally kill you. Of course, I won't let you work for nothing. I believe you'll soon realize that money is just a set of numbers that keep increasing to you. After saying this, Tangjin waved his hand and over 10 pieces of gold, which seemed to have been cut by a sharp blade, appeared in front of the young man. They were dazzling. The young man estimated that the weight of the gold was definitely more than 200 kilograms. Take these gold when you leave. Then, you can gain a firm foothold in the city and work hard for me. Tangjin thought for a moment before taking out a military pistol and a few magazines filled with bullets from his space and handing them to the young man. Discover WStories on no/e/lbin.com. When the young man was about to leave with his things, Tangjin suddenly thought of something and asked, "Oh right, I still don't know your name." "I thought you wouldn't ask, boss. Just call me Fong." The young man smiled bitterly. "Okay, I know. You can go now." Tangjin wanted to get rid of these puppets once and for all. Other than removing all the brain pearls that acted as their internal power source, he could also download an application for emergency use. Electromagnetic Pulse Bomb, destruction radius of 1 kilometer. Download cost, 10,000 gold coins. Tangjin had studied the structure of the puppets of the flashing gold race. After his analysis, the technology of the flashing gold race had many similarities with the technology of the original world, and the electromagnetic pulse bomb might be effective. It was just that this application would only take effect after the puppets had started running. Now that all the puppets were shut down, Tangjin couldn't use it even if he downloaded it. There was another way, which was to kill the queen of the flashing gold race and the others. Without the glitter gold race's control, these puppets would not be able to be activated. This was the most thorough solution. However, if he were to get rid of this group of people, Tangjin might never be able to obtain the technology regarding the usage of the brain pearl's energy. He might not even be able to make these mechanical puppets his own. Tangjin felt very conflicted in his heart. This kind of technology that could transform the brain pearl into a power source was too important to him. As long as he could master this method, he would be able to get rid of his dependence on the energy of his original world and gradually develop a brand new energy system. After thinking for a long time, Tangjin finally made up his mind. The disaster of the flashing gold race could not be left alive. Otherwise, they would only bring disaster upon themselves. Even if nothing happened this time, Holy Dragon City might be bitten by these guys in the future. With the existence of an unstable factor like the Queen of the Flashing Gold race, Tangjin wouldn't be surprised no matter what they did. As for the energy conversion technology, Tangjin believed that as long as he studied it carefully, he would eventually master it. After all, there was a pile of physical objects there, so reverse cracking should not be a problem. In that case, let's start. Tangjin selected an application from his list of applications and clicked on it to start it. At the same time, a low-frequency sound wave began to ripple in the fallout shelter. This was not the first time Tangjin had used an infrasonic weapon. Therefore, he was extremely familiar with the might of such an application. It was an invisible blade that could kill without spilling blood. It could attack the most sensitive and fatal part of the enemy's body. Because this application had the function of protecting the user, Tangjin did not need to worry that he would be hurt by the infrasonic waves. He only needed to wait for the results quietly. The last time he heard the Queen of the Glitter Gold race talk about the destruction of the sanctuary, he had a vague guess about the invisible devil. It might be a kind of terrifying infrasonic wave, but the Glitter Gold race did not understand this thing. Compared to the technology of the original world, which was developing in all aspects, the Glitter Gold race was somewhat biased. They were obsessed with the technology of metal machinery and had created metals similar to memory alloys, metal cloths with excellent performance, and mechanical puppets similar to robots. However, in other aspects, the Flashing Gold tribe was very backward, only slightly better than the Aboriginals in the world of Luching. In other words, the Flashing Gold tribe was a pure metal civilization. They had a natural advantage, but they also had a fatal flaw. They could rise easily, but they could also be destroyed easily. While Tangjin was thinking about this problem, the remaining Glitter Gold clan members in the sanctuary under his feet were in extreme pain. The Glitter Gold clansmen who had just gathered together to discuss how to plot against Holy Dragon City suddenly felt their bodies trembling non-stop, and traces of dirty blood began to seep out of their orifices. Their souls also began to tremble, and a sense of panic and madness overwhelmed them. It made them feel as if the whole world was spinning upside down, as if their souls would be completely destroyed in the next second. LL News Tirais at N0V/LBI/.cm. This feeling was so familiar, and it made them extremely fearful. It was the culprit who had killed the Glitter Gold race in the sanctuary, the invisible and terrifying devil. At this moment, almost all the surviving members of the Glitter Gold race were lamenting in their hearts, lamenting why the heavens were so unfair. Not only did the Glitter Gold race encounter a catastrophe of extinction, but they had just had a chance to leave the sanctuary and return to the surface. Who knew that they would be entangled by this hateful devil again? Perhaps this time, the Flashing Gold race is going to be completely exterminated. The Queen of the Flashing Gold race waved her hands in vain. The strange mask had fallen off, revealing her twitching and deformed face. The blood flowing out of her 7 orifices made her look even more hideous and ugly. The pain of the body and soul was nothing, because the torture of the resentment in the heart was 10 times more painful than this. Ever since the Queen of the Glitter Gold race regained consciousness and found out that the sanctuary had been destroyed and all her people had died, she had been resentful. She hated the gods and all the living beings in this world who could live normally. After being trapped in the sanctuary for so many years, the Queen of the Glitter Gold race and her remaining subordinates had paid a huge price and finally confirmed that they had left their original world and were now in a world full of monsters. Like them, the monster had a brain that contained strange energy. Other than that, the Glitter Gold race also discovered that the mechanical puppets they created were not affected by the rules and could move outside the sanctuary. However, because the mechanical puppets had to be controlled by the Glitter Gold race at a close distance, the range of movement of the mechanical puppets was extremely limited. The last time Tangjin was attacked by the bladed puppets on the 2nd underground floor of the Fallout shelter, it was actually the Queen of the Flashing Gold race who was hiding on the 3rd underground floor and controlled the bladed puppets to do it. The restrictions on the use of mechanical puppets made the Glitter Gold race realize that they had to find a way to leave the sanctuary. Only then would they have the hope of rising again. Otherwise, they could only wait for the day of decay and death. However, after experimenting for decades, they still could not find a suitable method. Instead, they accidentally discovered a method to convert the brain into power, which increased the combat power of the mechanical puppets by more than several times. It was also because of this invention that the Queen of the Flashing Gold race killed all the zombies without intelligence, except for the monsters on the 1st floor, so that they could make their final contribution to the Flashing Gold race. In fact, even if the Queen of the Flashing Gold race didn't do anything, these monsters would still devour each other, because they needed to eat too. As for the massive amount of monster corpses, they were burned and converted into energy. Some of the corpses were used to feed a type of scavenger fly. Monsters also needed to eat, and what they ate were these fly eggs. After many years, the new mechanical marionettes of the Glitter Gold race were completed and placed in the bottom few floors of the sanctuary. The Queen of the Glitter Gold race and her people continued to wait for the opportunity to leave the sanctuary. After Tangjin appeared, the Queen of the Flashing Gold race knew that the opportunity she had been waiting for had finally arrived. What Tangjin didn't know was that from the moment he entered the first floor, the Queen of the Flashing Gold race had been observing and plotting against him. Until the two of them reached an agreement on the third floor, Tangjin's every move in the sanctuary was under the surveillance of the Queen. It was also because of this kind of constant surveillance that the Queen of the Flashing Gold race discovered many secrets about Tangjin. It also gave the Queen of the Flashing Gold race hope of escaping the sanctuary. The soft cloth armor worn by the Queen of the Flashing Gold race could block Tangjin's detection, so Tangjin had never discovered the existence of the Queen. If it wasn't for the fact that the Queen had deliberately revealed a flaw on the third underground floor, Tangjin would never have discovered her. The Queen of the Flashing Gold clan put on a good show in front of Tangjin. Although Tangjin was skeptical, he still cultivated the body with the greatest sincerity. Tangjin was ready to fulfill his promise. The Queen of the Flashing Gold race also thought that the plan was going to succeed. She would immediately lead the mechanical puppet army to the ground and occupy the so-called Holy Dragon City. Then, she would restore the glory of the Flashing Gold race. But why did the invisible demon reappear when the plan was about to succeed and wanted to take away the lives of it and its people again, taking away the last hope of the Glitter Gold race's revival? Her people were all dead, and the Queen of the Flashing Gold race felt that she was about to die as well. However, in her daze, she seemed to hear familiar footsteps. It should be the young man who had made a deal with her. How did he appear here? Did he discover the secret? When did he discover it, Yingluo? The Queen of the Flashing Gold race had countless questions in her mind, but she could not ask them because a large amount of blood was spurting out of her mouth. However, the young man walked up to her and said in a mocking tone, "I know your plan, but it's a pity that you're destined to fail. Also, I was the one who released that demon Yingluo." When the Queen of the Flashing Gold race heard this, her body trembled violently. She struggled to reach out to grab Tangjin, but her arm only reached out halfway before it fell limply. The Glitter Gold clan was exterminated. Looking at the Queen of the Flashing Gold race's twisted and unwilling face, Tangjin was speechless for a long time. Originally, the foundation of cooperation between the two sides was very weak. After the Queen of the Flashing Gold race, Tangjin could only choose to fight. This was the result that Tangjin did not want to see the most. Think about it, if the cooperation between the two sides was successful, Tangjin would obtain the technology of the Flashing Gold clan, and the Flashing Gold clan would get a chance to revive with Tangjin's help. What a win-win result! It was a pity that things never went as one wished. Situations like the Queen of the Flashing Gold race's scheme, which ended up in vain, were not uncommon. After all, the Queen of the Flashing Gold race had suffered the consequences of her own actions, and she could not blame anyone else. 5ddeu upts on NOV/E/LN.com. The matter was over, and the Glitter Gold race was history. What he had to do next was to clean up the entire sanctuary and rebuild his own underground city. As for the original sanctuary of the Flashing Gold race, after Tangjin took out the cornerstone to build a new auxiliary city, it would disappear from this world and become history forever. After Tangjin carefully searched the bottom of the sanctuary a few times, he finally found the foundation of the sanctuary. The Queen of the Flashing Gold race didn't touch it and just let it float in the middle of a room. There were no powerful monsters guarding the foundation stone. Perhaps they had been completely cleaned up by the Queen of the Flashing Gold race. The harvest of the brain pearls was not as much as he had imagined, because most of the brain pearls were used by the Glitter Gold race to make mechanical puppets. Now, only a small portion was left, and they were placed in some metal boxes according to their ranks. Tangjin glanced at them and kept them all in the storage space. Next, Tangjin began to search for the literature of the Flashing Gold clan. As long as it was metal paper with words, he put it all into his storage space. These things were related to the technology of the Flashing Gold race, so Tangjin didn't dare to be careless. He thoroughly searched every corner of the bottom floor. After confirming that he didn't miss anything, he returned to the body of the Queen of the Flashing Gold Race with satisfaction. As the blade flashed, the brains of the Queen of the Flashing Gold Race and her clansmen also entered Tangjin's storage space. However, he had stored them separately. He had already gotten what he wanted, and now it was time to send people to clean up the place. Slowly walking back to the surface, Tangjin informed the residents of the Holy Dragon City and asked them to organize a cleanup. There were too many things in the fallout shelter. Tangjin estimated that it would take at least 1 to 2 months to clean up, and this did not include the metal puppets. Fortunately, the Flashing Gold tribe had a special metal puppet transportation channel that could transport these metal puppets to the surface in batches. Tangjin had already figured out the use of this elevator-like transportation device. When the time came, they only needed to transport them up in a concentrated manner. The residents who received the order immediately got busy. Because they would encounter strange things when they entered the building at night, they could only work during the day. Time was tight, and everyone was racing against time. Seeing that almost all of them had been mobilized, but they still felt that there was not enough manpower, Tangjin felt that the Holy Dragon City should recruit residents again. Under normal circumstances, as long as a city was announced to be recruiting residents, it would not take long for the Wanderers to swarm in. However, the Undead clan was wreaking havoc now, and almost all the Wanderers in this area had fled. Even if they sent out a message to recruit residents, it would probably not be very effective. In order to raise people, they had to provide for food, drink, and accommodation, which was not a small expense. Therefore, the other towers were extremely strict with the number of residents and the qualifications to be selected. Those wanderers who were lucky enough to obtain the preparatory qualifications were so excited that they were about to go crazy. Tangjin, who had the support of the original world, did not have such concerns. He dared to take as many people as he could. Although he still had to rely on the resources of the original world, once the Holy Dragon City was on the right track, Tangjin would be able to get rid of his dependence on the original world, whether it was food or weapons. When that time came, the original world's greatest use would be to provide a massive number of immigrants to the Holy Dragon City, making the Holy Dragon City even more powerful. Tangjin sat on the grass under the mother tree and thought for a long time before he collected his thoughts. He began to think about how to store the huge amount of supplies in the sanctuary. The Flashing Gold Race's sanctuary was too big and there were too many things inside. In line with the principle of not wasting anything, Tangjin asked the residents to move out as much as possible. Who would have thought that these residents would be worse than him? They were used to living a life without anything. In the eyes of these residents, they couldn't tolerate any waste. If they didn't move away all these good things, they would definitely not be able to sleep. Therefore, even if Tangjin didn't give this order, they would have dug the ground 3 feet and moved the Flashing Gold Race's sanctuary clean. Tangjin watched as the residents moved the pure gold sculptures that weighed more than a ton to the ground. He couldn't help but admire their perseverance. Now, there wasn't even a piece of paper left in the places that they had cleaned up. However, in this case, the material reserves had become a big problem. They couldn't just randomly throw them in the Holy Dragon Valley, right? Tangjin thought for a long time before finally locking his eyes on the cliffs that provided the Holy Dragon City with a protective barrier. He wondered if he should open some caves in these cliffs so that he could store these resources. Taking advantage of the abundant brain beads in his hand, Tangjin didn't hesitate and immediately activated the terrain transformation plugin, starting to transform these cliffs. This application could only be used for 1 minute a day, and it would consume a large amount of gold coins. Therefore, Tangjin had to plan it in his heart before he could start to modify it. Tangjin's eyes swept around these cliffs. After he had a draft in his heart, he launched the application and began to quickly operate on the map. With the activation of the application, the interior of the cliffs began to undergo earth-shaking changes. As long as Tangjin's finger passed through the three-dimensional image of the cliffs, a straight and wide giant cave would instantly appear under the cliffs. These cliffs were all very high and wide. The caves that Tangjin had opened up had no effect on them. It was as if he had just drilled a hole in a huge rock. However, once one entered the ground, one would discover how wide the inside was. After 1 minute, Tangjin had just finished opening up the cave he had designed. If it wasn't for the extremely fast hand speed of a rank 5 cultivator, Tangjin wouldn't have been able to complete the design before the time was up. Looking at the cliffs of the Holy Dragon Valley again, one could see many holes at the bottom. Once one entered, they would find that the inside was extremely spacious. Moreover, the inside of the cave was not completely dark, because the sun was shining in through the holes above them. After informing the Holy Dragon City's management of this news, Tangjin also joined the cleaning team. They kept the larger metal objects into the space and then placed them back into the cave. With the addition of Tangjin, the residents didn't need to carry those heavy objects, so the carrying work doubled. However, there were simply too many resources in the sanctuary. Even Tangjin, who possessed a terrifying speed, had to work for 4 to 5 days without his feet touching the ground before he could move all the heavy metal objects into the cave. In the process of moving the goods, many residents had injured their hands and feet by the flashing gold tribe's artifacts. Some even had their heads broken. Tangjin felt that this could not go on. He had to provide the residents with basic labor protection. Therefore, after carrying the heavy metal objects, Tangjin activated the teleportation and appeared in the rented house in the Pickle Nation. Tangjin planned to purchase some labor protection supplies this time. Because it was a small matter, he didn't need Xiaofeng. He could easily settle it himself. In addition, Tangjin also planned to buy some meat and oil for the residents to improve their meals. The food for the Holy Dragon City's residents was pretty good. In addition to a sufficient supply of rice and steamed buns, there were also many canned food, dried fish, and dried meat. They were all good things that Tangjin had transported back from the pier of the Pickle Nation. However, he would definitely get sick of eating these things every day. Tangjin didn't know what other people were thinking, but he had eaten enough and didn't want to eat a single bite. If Tangjin's thoughts were to be known by the residents of the Holy Dragon City, they might not say anything, but they would definitely think that the city lord was not content. Now, in the endless wilderness, where could one find a good place like the Holy Dragon City? Not only did the residents have enough to eat, but they also didn't need to spend money. This way, the residents could save up the jade coins they earned and go to the shops in the Holy Dragon City to buy some things they liked. Different life experiences naturally led to different thoughts. This was a very normal thing. Driving his own pickup truck, Tangjin directly rushed to the shopping mall. He didn't care what brand it was. As long as it was something he thought was delicious, he would throw it into the shopping cart in piles. The customers at the side stared at him and thought that they had never seen people buy things like this. Could it be that these things didn't cost money? Of course, these things required money, but Tangjin wasn't short of money now. After buying a large cart of food and drinks, Tangjin left the market. When no one was paying attention, he put these things into the storage space and began to buy raw meat, chicken and fish, as well as labor protection supplies for the residents. Tangjin treated this purchase as a holiday and enjoyed himself. When it was time to eat, Tangjin found a restaurant on the street. After ordering a few dishes, he buried his head and started eating. Halfway through the meal, Tangjin's phone rang. He took it out and saw that it was an unfamiliar number. Tangjin's phone number was very special. It was a messy combination of numbers and symbols. It was also encrypted by the all-purpose electronic kit. Other than people familiar with Tangjin, there was almost no possibility of a wrong call. He pressed the answer button and a low male voice with a strong accent of the North Sea Alliance immediately came from the receiver. "Your Excellency, I am Pargo. Tangjin placed his chopsticks on the table and softly said, "What's wrong with you guys? Why have you disappeared for so long?" "You don't know," Pargo said. "Some force in the Ice Bear Alliance is after us, and we've just gotten rid of them. We're hiding in a primitive forest, and Mr. Ivanov is right next to me." As soon as Pargo's voice fell, Ivanov's voice came from the phone. "Your Excellency, I've underestimated my enemy this time. But don't worry, it won't take long for me to solve the problem, because I've already obtained the support of an important figure." Ivanov talked for a long time, and Tangjin finally understood the cause and effect of the matter. To put it bluntly, it was the trouble caused by the magic soldier armor and the card's protective shield. Ivanov and the others were targeted by a high-level force of the Ice Bear Alliance, who wanted to get these things into their hands. Fortunately, Ivanov was prepared for this situation. Now that he had found a strong shelter, it would not be long before he could appear in public. Tangjin wasn't too interested in these things. Whatever Ivanov wanted to do was his own business. Tangjin only needed to give him the most basic help. Of course, this basic thing was also the most important thing to Ivanov. After chatting for 20 minutes, Tangjin hung up the phone. Since he had confirmed that Ivanov and the others were fine, the stone hanging in Tangjin's heart was finally lifted. Ivanov was a very important chess piece in his original world. Tangjin could not give up on him easily. In fact, Tangjin had already made a plan. If Ivanov still did not appear, he would personally look for him. After receiving the good news, Tangjin's mood naturally became much better. He ordered 2 more dishes and slowly ate while drinking. Unfortunately, Tangjin's meal was destined to be unable to be eaten in peace. The waiter had just served the dishes when Tangjin saw 2 people coming in from the door. He knew one of them. It was the girl from his neighbor's house. The one beside her was also a little familiar. It was just that Tangjin could not recall where he had seen her before. The girl from the neighbor's house was clearly here for Tangjin. She pulled the arm of the girl beside her and directly sat in front of Tangjin's table. She said to him, "I saw your car at the entrance just now, so I came in." "Uncle, you disappeared for so many days, where did you go?" Tangjin raised his head and smiled. "I'm busy with my business. I just came back today." "What are you doing? Do you want to eat together?" "Sure, Huyen and I haven't eaten yet, so we'll help ourselves then." Upstada T from N0/V/LBN/.co/M. The girl winked at the girl next to her. The other person showed a helpless expression, as if she thought that this was not good. However, she could not resist her friend's constant eye signals, so she could only smile dryly and did not get up to leave. Tangjin was indifferent. He called the waiter and ordered a few more dishes. Only after that did the 3 of them start to chat. It was only then that Tangjin found out that the girl next door was called Jean Mingjin and her friend was called Lin Huyen. They were currently in the same university and had a very good relationship. After eating, Tangjin planned to leave, but who knew that Jean Mingjin would insist on shopping with him. Tangjin couldn't resist and could only follow along. Ever since he came to the kimchi country, Tangjin had never seriously shopped once. Now, he felt pretty good to be shopping with 2 little girls, so Tangjin was not in a hurry to leave. After walking around for a while, the 3 of them came to an arcade. The 2 girls immediately went in and chattered about what game they wanted to play. Tangjin wasn't very interested in this kind of thing. However, he couldn't resist the 2 girls pulling and pulling. Thus, he also went over. In front of a shooting game machine, a few men immediately greeted Jean Mingjin and her partner when they saw them. They seemed to be familiar with each other. When they saw Tangjin and the girl walk over, a blonde man's expression turned a little off. He turned to Lin Huiyan and asked, "Who's that guy?" It was obvious that this guy was interested in Lin Huiyan and even treated her as his exclusive property. That was why he was hostile to the strange man beside her. Now that he was speaking in such a tone in front of Tang Jin, it was obvious that he had the intention of making things difficult for Tang Jin. Tang Jin also ignored this fellow. His gaze gently swept over his body and directly treated him like air. As though he was provoked by Tang Jin's attitude, the golden-haired man swept his gaze at the game console beside him. He raised his chin towards Tang Jin and said, "Hey, uncle, do you dare to have a match?" After he finished speaking, he raised the toy gun in his hand and made a provocative aiming gesture at Tang Jin. Tang Jin originally wasn't in the mood to pay attention to this guy with exuberant hormones. He was about to open his mouth to refuse, but who knew that Lin Huiyan, who had been quiet all the way, would suddenly walk up and place a toy gun in Tang Jin's hand. At the same time, she smiled sweetly and said, "Come on, uncle. I believe you can win." Tang Jin was stunned for a moment. He turned his head to look at the golden-haired man and discovered that his expression was gloomy and his nose was almost crooked from anger. "Cuckoo," Tang Jin laughed softly. He sized up the tall girl in front of him and nodded, "Since that's the case, let's have a competition. I'll say this first, you're not allowed to cry if you lose." Tang Jin's serious tone caused the two girls to continuously laugh. However, it also caused the golden-haired man to become even more infuriated. He coldly laughed and stood in front of the machine. There was a fury suppressed in his heart. He thought that he would definitely make Tang Jin lose all face later. The game in front of him was his strong suit. Among the old players in the entire arcade, he was ranked in the top 3. In the blonde man's opinion, Jin Tang would definitely lose. Using what he was best at to defeat his opponent, only then could he show his excellence in front of Lin Huiyan. When the game started, the golden-haired man aimed with both hands, appearing very professional. On the other hand, Tang Jin had a relaxed expression. The pistol was held loosely by him, as if it would fall at any time. The golden-haired man sneered repeatedly when he saw this. He had already started to imagine how he would use the sharpest words to ridicule Tang Jin after he won the competition later. Swish! On the big screen in front of him, a door opened, and 2 zombies pounced out. The blonde man pulled the trigger on reflex, but at this moment, 2 crisp papa sounds were heard, and the 2 zombies' heads had been blown up. The golden-haired man was startled. He turned his head to look at Tang Jin by the side, only to see the latter raising a gun with one hand and smiling at him in disdain. "Wow, Uncle's shooting speed is so fast." Lin Huiyan's exaggerated shout made the blonde man even angrier, and his hands started shaking. "Pa pa pa." As the game progressed, the two of them continued to shoot at each other. Compared to the golden-haired man's nervousness and concentration, Tang Jin appeared to be much more casual. However, for some unknown reason, the pistol in his hand seemed to have activated its automatic positioning. Every bullet would land on the monster's head. It was fast and swift, and none of the bullets missed. Looking at the points obtained by the two, the gap was getting bigger and bigger. The golden-haired man inadvertently saw Tang Jin's points and was greatly shocked. At this moment, he finally realized that he had kicked an iron plate. He couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. How would Lin Huiyan look at him if he lost later? Who knew that he would be so depressed after failing to act tough? The game finally ended. Seeing the crazy number of points Tang Jin obtained, the onlookers were so shocked that their mouths were wide open. This was because they had never thought that this game could still obtain such a high score. A few men and women who were watching looked at Tang Jin as if they were looking at a god. They were just short of pouncing over and asking to be taught by him. Jin Mingjin and Lin Huiyan's performance was even more exaggerated, as if they were the ones who won the competition. They surrounded Tangjin and chattered non-stop, making the single dogs feel inferior. The golden-haired man's face was gloomy and he did not say anything. He coldly glanced at Tangjin before turning around and leaving. Tangjin looked at the golden-haired man's back and softly laughed. He thought in his heart, I have only displayed a small portion of my strength. If I were to display all of it, I would definitely cause you to explode. After playing and making a scene, Tangjin planned to leave. The two girls also didn't plan to play anymore, so they followed him out. As soon as they reached the door, the three of them heard the sound of a fight. Lin Huiyan listened for a while, then rushed over with an anxious expression. Tangjin could only follow when he saw this. From afar, he could see a man waving his fist and fighting with 7 or 8 people. Tangjin swept his gaze over and was surprised to find that it was a familiar face. It was the young man whose glasses he had snatched and who had stolen the water tank from his fire truck. The fellow who was fighting with him was not anyone else. It was the golden-haired man who was competing with Tangjin. Lin Huiyan rushed over to protect the young man's back, loudly reprimanding the blonde man. Unexpectedly, the blonde man seemed to have turned his love into hatred. He actually laughed hideously and waved his hand, pushing Lin Huiyan to the side. The crowd once again swarmed forward. Jin Mingjin hurriedly rushed over to help Lin Huiyan up, at the same time looking at Tangjin for help. Tangjin was unable to turn a blind eye to the two girls, who were like helpless kittens. However, when he thought about how he had finally managed to get a day's rest, he ended up encountering so many terrible things, causing Tangjin to feel depressed in his heart. Tangjin slowly walked forward. He extended his hand and picked up a young man. After which, he threw him to the side. A huala sound was heard as the young man was thrown a few meters away, knocking over quite a number of display items. As the sound of collision was heard, the golden-haired man also noticed Tangjin. Jealousy flickered in his eyes. The golden-haired man immediately called 3 people and headed straight for Tangjin. Tangjin did not show any mercy when he attacked the golden-haired man, who had a bitter and hateful expression on his face. These 4 people had just rushed in front of him when Tangjin slapped each of them in the face. The 4 of them were slapped until they spun 2 rounds on the spot before they dizzily fell to the ground. Just as they wanted to force themselves to get up, Tangjin pressed down on their bodies one by one. The 4 of them immediately cried out for their parents in pain and began to roll on the ground. In a short while, snot and tears flowed down. When Tangjin had nothing to do and was reading books, he had once seen the meridian network diagram of the human body. He tried to use the energy in his body to break through the acupuncture points and found that it was very effective. It was just that different acupuncture points gave people different feelings. The intensity of the pain was also proportional to the energy that Tangjin injected. The 4 guys rolling on the ground had to endure 10 minutes of painful torture before they could gradually calm down. This painful and miserable cry immediately startled the few people who were fighting at the side. When they saw the golden-haired man and the other 3 people rolling on the ground, they immediately abandoned the young man who had been beaten until his face was bruised and directly charged toward Tangjin. When the young man who was being beaten up saw that it was Tangjin who came to his rescue, his face was filled with disbelief. He was about to jump up and say something, but Lin Huiyan grabbed his arm and kept wiping his nose with a tissue. Tangjin was impartial towards the few people who rushed forward. He gave each of them a slap and then pointed at their acupuncture points. The ground of the shopping mall was filled with snot worms rolling around and wailing like a large group of fat pigs waiting to be slaughtered. The sound was extremely ear-piercing. Jin Mingjin and Lin Huiyan supported the young man with a bruised face as they walked over. When they saw Tangjin, their eyes were full of stars. "Uncle, you're really amazing. What kind of kung fu is that?" Read latest OVLS at nv/e/l/by.com. After saying that, the two of them even stretched out their white and tender fingers and rubbed them together, occasionally letting out a burst of delicate laughter. The young man with a bloody nose and a swollen face snorted, but he did not say anything. However, his constantly moving eyes betrayed him. It was obvious that he was also very interested in this. "We'll talk about this later. I'm ready to run. What about you guys?" Tang Jin turned around and walked outside as he spoke. The two girls hurriedly pulled the pig-headed young man and chased after him when they saw this. While they were walking, Lin Huiyan said to Tang Jin, "Uncle, you don't have to worry. Someone will help us deal with this matter. You're fine, so you don't have to worry." The pig-headed young man immediately added, "That's right. Don't be afraid. I'm the one who's going to teach that guy who's been bothering Huiyan a lesson. It's not your fault." Tang Jin was speechless. He thought to himself, "How can you tell that I'm afraid? I just don't want to deal with the Kimchi country's police." After walking out of the mall, Tang Jin walked to his pickup truck and opened the driver's seat. He didn't expect the three people behind him to actually follow him into the car. "Hey, I'm going home. Why are you following me?" Tang Jin turned his head to look at the three of them as he asked with a puzzled expression. "Of course I'm hitchhiking. Uncle, you won't be so stingy, right?" Jean Mingjin replied with a sly look on her face. At the same time, she blinked her eyes and looked at Tang Jin. Tang Jin silently turned his head and started the car. Very quickly, it merged into the rolling traffic. The pickup truck arrived at the entrance of Jean Mingjin's house. The three of them got off the truck and headed to Jean Mingjin's house. At the same time, they invited Tang Jin over to have a seat, but Tang Jin politely declined. After returning to his own house, Tang Jin locked the door and activated the teleportation function, returning to the world of Luqing. After sending the food he bought to the dining hall to cook, Tang Jin distributed labor protection appliances to the Holy Dragon City residents who were working. Then, he went to the old man who trained the ogres to see the progress of the training. Tang Jin saw an ogre tied up in chains from a long distance away from the taming site. The ogre was being led by a big bear and was wandering around the valley. Old Wan and a few Holy Dragon City residents followed behind, talking about something as they walked. After seeing Tang Jin come over, Big Bear pulled the ogre over as if he was presenting a treasure, and he couldn't stop smiling foolishly. Big Bear's height was already abnormal, but in front of the huge ogre, he was as tall as a child. However, as the big bear pulled it, the ogre followed obediently like an obedient baby, giving off an extremely awkward visual impact. Perhaps Tang Jin had left a shadow of fear in the ogre's heart. After seeing Tang Jin, the ogre seemed to cower and didn't dare to move forward. De Xiong immediately became angry when he saw this. He kicked the ogre's legs twice, and the ogre followed him. Tang Jin, who saw the scene, could not help but sigh in his heart. If the size of the ogre was reduced by countless times, its current performance would be similar to that of a puppy. This old man Wan is quite resourceful. I'll tell Xian later to give them some appropriate rewards. If the effect of the domestication can be maintained, they can definitely be upgraded to a higher level as residents. Tang Jin took the iron chain from Big Bear's hand and gently pulled it. At first, the ogre seemed to resist, but after being kicked by Big Bear, it immediately became obedient. Tang Jin looked at this scene curiously. He turned around and asked Old Wan Tou, "What's going on?" The ogres seemed to be afraid of the bear. Old Wan Tu laughed and said, "You're right, my lord. These ogres are really afraid of Big Bear. As long as Big Bear is angry, these ogres will immediately become obedient. There's also something strange about Big Bear. It seems like Big Bear can understand the ogre's language. I don't know what's going on. This was a rare thing. He didn't expect De Xiong to have such an ability. Tang Jin looked at the big bear that was feeding the ogres. He glanced at the bear's unusual size and recalled the bear's habit of eating brains. He could not help but think of a forbidden scene. Could it be that the bloodline of the big bear contained the genes of the ogres? Shaking his head to drive away the strange image in his mind, Tang Jin chatted with Yulao Wan for a while. After figuring out the progress of the taming of the ogres, he began to study the custom weapons and equipment for the ogres. Considering the magical power of the ogres and their strong recovery ability, Tang Jin decided to equip them with heavy armor that was covered with sharp blades. Then, he would equip them with blunt weapons like maces to increase the destructive power of the ogres. The Holy Dragon City was unable to make this kind of armor, so Tang Jin had to take the time to go to the original world. After leaving Old Wan's place, Tang Jin went to the mother tree again to check on the cultivation progress of Lisa and the other two. Under the huge mother tree, Tang Jin was surprised to see the pure man, Yuelang, who had the elf bloodline and was more beautiful than a woman. At this moment, his eyes were closed with a pious expression as if he was communicating with the mother tree. No wonder she didn't see him when she came back. It turned out that this kid had run here. Tang Jin walked forward and suddenly discovered that Yuelang's body seemed to be flashing with light. From the signs, it was clear that he had successfully communicated with the mother tree. Tang Jin was both surprised and happy when he saw this. Although Yuemong was a half-elf, he was also a resident of the Holy Dragon City. Tang Jin was naturally happy that he could communicate with the Mother Tree because this meant that the Holy Dragon City's strength had once again increased. However, for Yuemong to be able to communicate with the Mother Tree so quickly, did it mean that the elf bloodline that worshipped nature was more suitable for communicating with the Mother Tree? And there was some kind of origin between the tree spirit tribe and the elves? Tang Jin didn't disturb Yuelang, Lisa, and the other two. He turned around and returned to the tower. In the newly transformed study room, he began to read the books and materials of the Flashing Gold race. As his level increased, Tang Jin's analytical ability gradually improved and his insight became sharper. Through the records in the books and Tang Jin's experiments, he had basically figured out the principle of the lighting system in the Flashing Gold Ray Sanctuary. The next thing he had to do was to lay the lighting equipment in the main locations of Holy Dragon City. The energy used by the Glitter Gold race came from a kind of transparent crystal. They put it into special metal equipment and produced a large amount of energy through special means. This energy was similar to electricity, but it did not need to be transmitted by wires and other conductors. Compared to electricity, it was undoubtedly much safer. Only when it came into contact with a special material would this energy produce a continuous light. The lighting used by the Glitter Gold race was made of this special material, and there were still some in stock. The sanctuary would disappear sooner or later. Therefore, Tang Jin ordered people to take down all the lamps and put them in the cave. They would only move them out when they needed to be used. Tang Jin was very free until Black Rock City asked him for help in dispatching troops, or until the kobolds recklessly harassed him again. He could use this time to renovate Holy Dragon City and make it more beautiful and neat. Looking down at the sacred Dragon Valley through the map view, Tang Jin began to plan. At the same time, he took out a pen and paper and recorded his thoughts. As he thought about it, he recorded it down. Very quickly, Tang Jin had written down a whole chapter. After carefully checking it, Tang Jin walked to the Holy Dragon City Square and shouted at Tai Sing, "Call your men over, we're starting to work." Yes. Seeing his boss in such high spirits, Tai Sing didn't dare to delay any further. He immediately called over all the soldiers who weren't assigned to defend the city and waited for Tang Jin's orders. Full 0W current novels on n/o/v/3l/b in.co/m. When Tang Jin saw that everyone had arrived, he ordered the residents in charge of managing the production tools to get pickaxes. After giving each person one, he directed everyone to dig trenches and level the soil. He also called all the foremen in charge of the valley's construction and explained his construction plan to them in detail. In Tangjin's plan, the entire front valley would be installed with lighting devices, so the amount of work would be huge. It was impossible for Tangjin to keep an eye on the construction all day long. It was also impossible for the soldiers to work all day long and neglect their training. Therefore, these jobs ultimately still needed the residents to complete them. Therefore, before this, Tangjin must let the residents in charge of management figure out what they wanted. After these people understood his thoughts, Tangjin would hand over the draft he had drawn to them. He would then have to travel between the two worlds as a porter. Since the work had been arranged properly, Tangjin naturally became a hands-off manager. Just as he was about to return to his study to continue reading and studying the Glitter Gold race's cumbersome technology, a shrill alarm suddenly rang out, echoing throughout the sacred Dragon Valley. Tangjin's heart tightened. This was an emergency alarm signal that would only be activated by the city guards when a major enemy situation was discovered. Tangjin switched to the map and glanced at it. He then looked at the sky above his head and suddenly turned around to run straight for the city wall. Kill! Tai Sing roared like a tiger, and all the Holy Dragon City soldiers who were working immediately raised their weapons and ran toward the city wall as fast as they could, each of them filled with killing intent. These soldiers were the most aware of how powerful the Holy Dragon City's combat power was. They were already doing a good deed by not causing trouble for others. Now, there were actually some ignorant fellows who came to attack them. Did they think that the Holy Dragon City was easy to bully? Outside the Holy Dragon City's city walls, close to 100,000 monsters had lost their lives. Their battle results were clear, and it was definitely a real bloodbath. At the top of the city wall, hundreds of soldiers in charge of defending the city had all entered battle-ready mode. Their eyes were fixed on the sky in front of them, because there was a large black dot flying over from far and close. Vis sit en velben, dot, cm for EU ovals. Tangjin had already clearly seen the appearance of the person who had arrived through the map's view. It was a half-human, half-bird creature. It had huge black wings, a human body, and bird feet. It wore a black mask on its face, and a leather tube was tied to its abdomen, which was full of sharp javelins. There were many of these black-feathered birdmen. Tangjin estimated that there were at least 100 of them. Once they formed an attack formation and threw javelins from the air, the killing power would be extremely terrifying. It would be a nightmare for any defenseless ground targets to encounter these black-feathered birdmen. Tangjin's expression was solemn. After seeing the attire of these birdmen, Tangjin was certain that they were not monsters but some kind of foreign race creature in the wilderness. Looking at the direction these foreign tribes were heading, they were clearly heading straight for Holy Dragon City. What were their intentions? The enemy can throw javelins from the air, so don't underestimate them. All of you go back to your rooms and hide. Load your weapons and get the anti-aircraft machine guns ready. Wait for my order. After Tangjin gave the order, the soldiers on the city wall immediately entered their rooms. At the same time, hundreds of guns were pointed at the sky, leaving Tangjin standing alone on the huge city wall. The group of black-feathered birdmen quickly approached. When they were less than 500 meters away from the Holy Dragon City, Tangjin already saw some of the black-feathered birdmen taking out short javelins from their leather tubes and getting ready to throw them. As expected, he didn't come with good intentions. Since that was the case, he didn't need to be polite. Tangjin's face was cold. When these black-feathered birdmen were less than 50 meters away from the Holy Dragon City, he suddenly swung his arm down and dodged to the side. Pft! 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 A few sharp javelins landed on the spot where Tangjin was originally standing. They were full of force and actually deeply embedded into the rocky ground. The Blackwing Birdmen had already begun their attack. A large number of short javelins poured down. However, before their javelins fell to the ground, a thunderous sound of gunfire rang out at the same time. The metal torrent shot into the sky and hit the Blackwing Birdman team. In an instant, the entire sky was filled with black feathers and splattering blood. The screams of the black-feathered birdmen were endless. Their broken bodies fell from the sky one after another, and then heavily fell to the ground, turning into piles of rotten meat. A black-feathered birdman held a short javelin in his hand, but before he could throw it, a rifle bullet blew up his head. The black-feathered birdman's body trembled, and the javelin fell to the ground. Then, he fell like a stone and hit the wall heavily, staining the wall with blood. From a distance, it looked like a strange, abstract rock painting. Dozens of black-feathered birdmen tried to throw their javelins into the rooms on the city wall after dodging the barrage of bullets. However, before they could get close to the city wall, a series of anti-aircraft machine gun bullets were fired at them. These black-feathered birdmen were directly torn into countless pieces, and their flesh and blood kept falling on the roofs. More than a dozen black-feathered birdmen rushed over the city wall and were about to rush into the Holy Dragon Valley, but they were sniped by the 1,000 dragons and the cultivators of the cultivator battle team one by one. Not a single one of them escaped. Other than the dozen or so black-feathered birdmen who were lucky enough to break through the blockade line, the rest of the black-feathered birdmen were blocked by the barrage of bullets and could not move an inch forward. The Holy Dragon City's wall ground, which was originally very clean, was now covered with minced meat and blood mixed with feathers, looking very bloody. The battle was extremely intense, but it was one-sided. The aggressive black-feathered birdmen were completely destroyed in less than 5 minutes. There were less than 100 black-feathered birdmen left in the dark sky. They were all dodging the bullets in panic. From time to time, some unlucky black-feathered birdmen would be shot and fall. If they were unlucky enough to be hit by the anti-aircraft machine gun, they would explode into a cloud of blood mist in the air. Sorrowful wails filled the air, and it was an unspeakable tragedy. The black-feathered birdmen, who had always regarded themselves as the overlords of the sky and looked down on the creatures on the ground, even slaughtering them as they pleased, had now encountered a group of humans who could easily kill them. This made them feel like their guts were being torn apart. This strong contrast made them at a loss, and many of the black-feathered birdmen were still unwilling to die. The leader of the black-feathered birdmen had rushed to the sky above the city wall several times in an attempt to kill the detestable human. He was the one who had given the order to attack just now. Furthermore, he had been looking at the noble Darkwing clansmen as if they were pigs or dogs. This kind of gaze made the leader of the black-feathered birds extremely furious. It swore that it would definitely kill this human and dismember his body into 1,000 pieces. With the support of his anger, the leader of the black-feathered birds finally reached the top of the city wall. However, before he could vent his anger, he saw the human raise his left arm and a white light shot out. The leader of the Blackwing birdmen felt a sudden pain in its body, and then its head was separated from its body. For the first time, it flew without the support of wings. Seeing his clansmen falling from the sky, the leader of the black-feather birdmen wanted to order them to retreat, but he could not make a sound. Bang! A large foot flew over and kicked the head of the leader of the black-feathered birdmen away like a ball. Another black-feathered birdman was knocked down in midair, and the two instantly exploded into a cloud of blood mist, floating below the Holy Dragon City's walls. Seeing that their leader had been killed in an instant, the black-feathered birdmen who had managed to escape by luck did not dare to hesitate any longer. They immediately turned around and retreated in the direction they had come from. In their opinion, as long as they were further away from the city wall, the humans who could not fly would be helpless. This time, the flying feather race had suffered heavy casualties. He must take revenge. When he returned to the tower, he must report to the master of Blackfeather City and gather a large group of warriors to take revenge. There were also the damned dog-headed people. Didn't they say that they had already sent out a large number of troops to surround the human city? However, there wasn't even the shadow of a dog to be seen. Were they toying with the Darkwing tribe? After flying a few kilometers away from Holy Dragon City, the black-feathered birdmen who were lucky enough to escape with their lives heaved a sigh of relief. Some of the injured black-feathered birdmen even began to bandage their wounds in the air. Looking at the few tens of Darkwing tribe members left, and then thinking about the spectacular scene of hundreds of their tribesmen brothers, the Blackwing birdmen felt a wave of sorrow. Damn humans, we must take revenge. We must attack their city, lift them into the air, and throw them to their deaths on the cliff. This was the black-feathered birdman's favorite way of execution, and now it was all reserved for the Holy Dragon City's residents. Well, that's all for this part, truckers. See you all in the next video.